Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 29. I snapped open my eyes and cracked a few joints in my neck before I sat up from my meditation. After rotating my shoulder a few times, I hinged into my umbu gear without the mask and looked down to my legs to see Leivia asleep while coiled up like a spring. After meeting May, the next couple of days had been relatively peaceful. Every once in a while, I would find the occasional shinobi spying my way, which now didn't surprise me. Usually, I couldn't care less as long as they made no moves. It wasn't like I had done anything noteworthy in the past few days anyway. However, those who showed large amounts of hostility while spying on me, I made sure to remove any physical traces of them from this planet. This usually applied to Awagakure shinobi and, surprisingly, some small shinobi villages such as Amagakure, and even Kusa. Were they also jealous of my looks? Or was my bounty really that enticing? Maybe they were promised something from IWA, considering that two of them bordered that country. Breaking from my train of thoughts, I gently ran my finger across Leivia's scales, rousing her from her sleep. Let's go. She flicked her tongue and wrapped up around my arm before resting her head in my shoulder. Since a few days ago, I had simply been in meditation. The primary reason was just to pass time, since I had nothing better to, though secondarily, I was trying not to focus on the image that had been imprinted in my mind thanks to eidetic memory of May's fine A. God fucking damn it. Hiss. I rolled my eye. Yeah, language. With that failure, I stood up from the couch, and in my energy and emotion radar, I sensed that Kabuto and Itachi had already been roused from sleep and were more or less ready. I had no idea where Orochimaru had disappeared off to since he hadn't come back last night. It wasn't like he actually needed to be here anyway, so I didn't really care much. In a few moments, Itachi and Kabuto were prepared and ready to go, so we all flickered to a featureless building somewhere near the edge of Sunagakure. We were immediately greeted with a bustle of activity from the numerous genin, and not so genin, teams of the various villages, big and small. It didn't take long for our group of three to enter the building, where we were immediately greeted by a desk manned by a few Suna shinobi, each one having a line that led to them. We got in line and waited for a moment until it was our turn. Name and affiliation? The desk man asked disinterestedly without even looking up from his paper. It seemed like he was already tired of doing this shit. Kabuto, Itachi, Yorodon. He paused and looked me in the eye before his expression flashed for a brief moment, one which I captured thanks to empathy. Team 10. Saying so, he handed me a small circular metal emblem with the kanji for the number 10 inscribed on it. Keep this on you at all times. If you lose it, you'll be disqualified. Using magnet release, I twirled it on my finger for a moment before gripping it tightly. Thank you. He nodded and gestured behind him. Past those doors and to the backyard. Keeping the emblem safe, we followed the directions given to us and found ourselves in a large clearing. There were numerous teams who were already milling about, some keeping to themselves and others blatantly eyeing each team that came by. Oddly enough, when my team walked by, the area became somewhat quiet as they looked at us, or was it me? Is it my good looks, I wonder? I muttered, though seeing the strange expressions on numerous individuals' faces, I hadn't been quiet enough. Not that I cared. Yoru! A familiar voice called out, breaking the awkward silence. I turned to see May along with the other two people that had been with her yesterday that I now identified as her teammates. She waved at me with a charming smile on her face. I smiled back in kind. May then placed her right hand's index and middle finger to her lips. With a light kiss, a ball of lava in the shape of a heart formed above those two fingers before she blew it towards me. Sensing no danger from the attack, I didn't move when it appeared in front of me and created a heart-shaped burn on my clothing, another where my heart was. My mouth was slightly agape. I had no idea she was so bold as to do this in public. The silence now became so uncomfortable that it somehow became deafening. Itachi gave me a knowing look and smile. "Let's just go to a corner," I stated, bringing Itachi and Kabuto with me to stay at a relatively inconspicuous part of the clearing. Though with me here, nowhere we went would be inconspicuous enough. The silence slowly dissipated as the teams did their own thing, though I could still sense many gazes directed at us. I idly fingered the heart-shaped hole on my henge clothing and smiled before repairing it with a thought. I looked across the clearing at Mei and her team. Perhaps somehow sensing my gaze, Mei turned to look at me for a brief moment before winking in my direction. Mei Terumi. Age 18. Has dual lava and boil release Kekii Genkai. Proficient in water, fire, and earth release nature transformations. She was demoted to genin on the premise of failing an important mission assigned to her by her Kage. Kabuto stated, adjusting his glasses and causing the sun to glare off of them. I blinked and looked at him. "How did you?" "I'm very good at this," was all he replied. I raised a brow and saw him in a new light. Then, what about her teammates? The one with Kobakira Bocho is named Zabuza Momochi. Age 18. Proficient in water release and has high jonin level capabilities. He became a genin under the same pretense. I rubbed my chin in thought and narrowed my eyes on the last guy. And him? At this, Kabuto's voice became low. Yuta Kata. Age 16. Proficient in water release. Most importantly, however, Kabuto adjusted his glasses. He is said to be in possession of the Six Tails and has some measure of control over its power. I thought so. I then looked around and paid attention mainly to the shinobi from the other great villages. What next caught my attention were a group of 3 shinobi from the stone village who was eyeing me intently. One of them had a calm and collected countenance, another looked at me murderously, while the last one, a kid about Itachi's age, just seemed excited. What about that lovely trio? Kabuto slightly furrowed his brows. The one with the spiky light brown hair is Gari. Age 19. A user of the explosion release Kekii Genkai. Proficient in earth and lightning release and a member of Iwagakura's explosion corps. Next to him is Itten, age 18. He's a decently high-leveled shinobi who is proficient in earth release. Finally, there's Deidara, age 11 and wielder of the explosion release Kekii Genkai, also. Here, he paused and adjusted his glasses before speaking in a hushed tone. My sources and investigations have concluded that he was granted access to Iwagakura's Kenjutsu on behest of the current Tsuchikage, Kitsuchi. I tilted my head. What relation does Kitsuchi have with Deidara? None that I could find, Kabuto stated. But he did have a relationship with the previous Tsuchikage as he was Inoki's stepson. I kept that information to heart and scanned around the area before I found a trio of Kumo ninja hanging back, the same trio I had seen yesterday. Now that I was looking at them up close, that blonde woman was really attractive. What about her? Kabuto blinked for a second before explaining. Samui. Age 16. Proficient in using lightning release and bladed weapons, more specifically, Tanto. I kept her in mind and looked for Sunagakure before I found their team. I, of course, only paid attention to the woman in the group. And she is? Maki, age 15. Kabuto began. Proficient in sealing techniques and uses a binding cloth to ensnare her enemies. She was trained by Pakura of the Scorch release, so she should be highly skilled. Interesting. Interesting indeed. With that, I observed for a moment longer until it seemed like all the teams who were going to participate came by. With just a glance, I counted about 52 teams of 3, meaning a total of 156 genins and genins. Then, it began. Alright, settle down because I'm not going to repeat myself. A guy said as he walked out of the building and stood in front of us. His visage painted the image of a guy who would rather be anywhere else than here, but who had to take this unassuming position because he had no choice in the matter. Let me make it clear, 90% of you are trash and some of that 90% will die within the first 2 portions of these exams because you are cannon fodder. If you have an issue with this, please leave. It would really make this entire process faster. He scanned the crowd and after seeing no movement apart from a few teams, he shrugged. Suit yourself. Now, I'll explain the first portion of the exam, so listen and listen well. The first portion is all about survival. Reaching into his pocket, the examiner took out an emblem similar to the one I had received at the desk. This here is necessary for the first 2 portions of the exams, and if you've already lost it or you don't have it out of any sort of storage seal by the time I'm done explaining the test, then you'll automatically fail and I won't have to deal with you. I saw many teens shuffling to get them out of whatever storage seal they had kept the emblem in, while I simply floated mine above my palm with magnet release. The proctor continued. In this first portion, you'll be transported, by a reverse summoning jutsu, to the Koren mountain range nearby, a mountainous area filled with many hills, ridges, and valleys. That place will be surrounded by a barrier that will be visible to you and all it does is notify us when a team's emblem has lost its signal. That goes without saying, if you leave the barrier, your team is disqualified. If your emblem signal disappears for even a second, your team is disqualified, so don't think about hiding them in storage seals and whatnot. If it's destroyed, your team is disqualified. Any questions? No? Really? Great. He then put the emblem away and sighed in annoyance. Your objective is to survive until only 10 teams are remaining. When there are only 10 emblem signals registered by the barrier, obviously not including signals that disappeared and reappeared, the barrier will automatically be removed. At that point, you and your team need to reach the exit point located at the north end of the mountain range in no less than an hour. If at least one of you don't get there with the emblem on time, your whole team will be disqualified. If only 1 or 2 of your teammates make it, the ones who didn't make it will be disqualified. Once you get there, the shinobi in charge will check to make sure you have your team's emblem and they'll reverse summon you back here using the same array. He then walked past the teams and made his way to the door before he stopped for a moment. Also, your teams will be teleported to completely different areas of the region and you'll have to survive there for as long as it takes. The sooner you guys kill each other off, the sooner you'll be able to get back and the less time you'll have to spend foraging like wild animals. He then snapped his fingers and walked out the door. Instantly, the ground beneath everyone here shined brightly, the light forming an intricate pattern. The luminosity of the light sharply increased in intensity for a brief moment and obscured my vision. When the light disappeared, I found myself in a barren area surrounded by thin tall rocky structures that would make navigating this terrain a nightmare. The sky had a light purple hue which must have been a result of the barrier the proctor had talked to us about. Both Itachi and Kabuto beside me as surveyed the area. Kabuto pushed up his glasses. Quite frankly, the most appropriate course of action with our lineup would be to get rid of as many teams as necessary as quickly as possible. Itachi nodded. Livia hissed in agreement. Then how do you propose we get it done? I asked. Kabuto explained. How far can you detect chakra signatures? About 20 kilometers, I stated. It doesn't cover the full area of this barrier's range, but I already have a lot of enemy chakra signatures in my radar. Then this should be fine. Kabuto then went on to explain. If you create some clones and have them scout out, they can take care of all the necessary teams. All we have to do is stay put and wait for the barrier to disappear. I raised a brow. It was a simple but very effective and efficient plan. Even though shadow clones inherently had low durability, I could increase the durability of my own with a bit more chakra. Additionally, my clones were just as powerful as I was, so they wouldn't have trouble handling anyone here. That being said, I didn't just want to stand around. After all, there were some people I wanted to take care of. I took out the emblem I was keeping and floated it towards Itachi, who took it with a questioning gaze. I explained, I'll leave a clone with you guys as well. I want to do my part to hurry this alone. As Itachi fiddled with the emblem, he gave me a knowing look. You just want to see Mei again, don't you? Why was this the conclusion he came to? Apparently taking my silence as agreement, he nodded in approval. Well, don't keep her waiting. The sooner you get with her, the sooner you can stop hitting on my mom. No, that would never happen. I rolled my eyes and didn't bother to explain. Whatever. Just keep it safe till I get back. With that, I created numerous clones with a puff. One stayed here with Itachi and Kabuto while the remaining ones dispersed throughout. I turned to Kabuto. Just in case, give me your hand. Blinking, he did as I asked. I grabbed his hand and implanted my natural healing mark on him. Since you're a medical ninja that Orochimaru has taken an interest to, you'll be able to use that technique effectively. You already know what that is, don't you? Somewhat wide-eyed in surprise, Kabuto nodded. Mystical healing. An improved upon mystic palm technique that incorporates natural energy in order to improve the effectiveness of the technique and regrow lost appendages. It was thought to be created by Jiraiya of the Sannin, but he adjusted his glasses. I have my doubts about that. Orochimaru told you, didn't he? I thought so, I said, shaking my head. In any case, stay safe and Itachi. I began, turning to face him. Don't be afraid to go all out if necessary. Both my clone and Kabuto can heal any damage you receive. Itachi nodded. With that, I used steel release to coat my arms and legs in the chakra-based substance before I took to the skies with magnet release. By utilizing magnet release on myself while my body was coated with steel release, I had much better and much faster control of my flight. It was much simpler than manipulating the wind around me. The only downside, however, was that I couldn't just magnet release regular humans unless they either used steel release like I did, wore a suit of armor or something, or they, for some reason, had large amounts of metal inside their body. Like if they had metal-coated bones or something. But who would be dumb enough to inject metal into someone's bones? With those strange thoughts, I made my way towards the area where I could sense a few chakra signatures. As I flew above the sky, I looked down below and eyed my targets before plummeting down rapidly. My feet cratered the ground as I landed and I turned my gaze up towards the surprised visions on my targets who were panicking. I quickly noticed the Suna headbands on their forehead, but they weren't the same Suna team I had paid attention to earlier. In a blur of motion, I appeared in front of one of them and before he could even comprehend where I had gone, I chopped the back of his neck. He slammed face first into the ground, his body leaving an imprint on the solid surface. I knew he was out cold, so I instantly appeared next to the second person who had just barely recovered. I slammed my knee into his gut and he puked. Holding his stomach for a moment, he lost concentration and fell to the ground unconscious. I then turned towards the last person in the group who was eyeing me in severe trepidation and walked towards him. He stepped back in fear, but in a single step, I was already upon him. I reached out my hand towards his person. Please don't dash. And grabbed his team's metal emblem. I could use magnet release to sense metals in the environment, and since all the emblems were made of the same kind of metal, they were easy to detect. He opened his eyes as he noticed that he was still alive before he stared at the emblem I had in my hand, sweat dripping from his brow. I smiled and spun it in the air with my control over magnetic metals. I'll be taking this off your hands. I hope you don't mind? He rapidly shook his head. Good, I said as I snagged the emblem from the air and crushed it. Be safe. With that, I launched into the air once more and focused on reaching my true destination. Along the way, however, I came across two groups of shinobi who were fighting each other. Seeing as they weren't my enemies or anything of the sort, I decided not to simply blow them up. I dropped down from the sky on top of two shinobi who had been fighting each other. My feet slammed into their heads and knocked them out cold. The remaining shinobi stopped what they were doing and looked my way, their bodies turning tense. Swift release. In a blur, I appeared in front of one of the remaining 4 ninjas and grabbed his face. Utilizing another burst of swift release, I rammed the back of his head into the face of another shinobi before he could react. Only 2 more were left. By the time I turned to look at them, spears of water and bolts of lightning shot out towards me from them. I took a single breath. Majestic destroyer flame. The water was vaporized and the lighting overwhelmed from the energy of my attack. They screamed as they were engulfed by the flames, but I adjusted it so that they wouldn't die. They weren't my enemies, so I had no reason to kill them off. This was just the Chunin exams after all. I walked towards their bodies and plucked the emblems from their down forms before crushing them. With that, I took to the skies once more. I could sense intense fluctuations of chakra coming from my destination, fluctuations that I was familiar with, and in a few moments, I saw who was fighting. From below, I noted Mei and was facing off against Samui in a confrontation of lava and lightning. Mei seemed to have the upper hand in the confrontation, but I found it odd that people from 2 powerful teams would meet and fight each other so early in the game. The surface area of this mountain range was extremely wide and the odds of any 2 teams finding each other this quickly was quite low. It made me wonder if our appearance here was as randomized as we were told. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to ruminate as I sensed foreign concentrated chakra signatures on their bodies. With instinct telling me that they were dangerous, I quickly dashed towards the 2 fighting women in flight and landed on the ground right between them. I augmented my free hand with steel release to intercept Samui's lightning-coated tanto from above while I simply placed my palm over Mei's mouth to block the corrosive mist that was eating at my hands. Their eyes widened in shock at my sudden appearance. I didn't get even a moment to explain as my hands blurred and grabbed at the foreign chakra concentrated objects that had been hidden on their bodies. They appeared as small white spider-shaped objects, but I didn't delve any further. My hands coated in steel release, I enclosed the objects into my fist, just before they detonated violently. I didn't flinch from the sting of pain as smoke emerged from my palms and quickly moved once more. Before the 2 women could comprehend what was going on, I grabbed them both and took to the skies. The ground abruptly ruptured. In a terrifying explosion, the radius of the blast encompassed over 1 kilometer of land and vaporized all of the landmarks that were in the way near instantly. Soon after, there was silence. What? Mei asked incredulously as she looked at the devastation beneath her. You both were being targeted, I explained. The chakra signature of the explosive white spider and whatever explosive had been planted underground was a familiar one that I had met not too long ago. It was from one of the Iwagakure ninjas. Gari of the explosion style. So not cool. Samui stated coldly before her face slightly warmed up as she looked at me, though her expression still seemed quite aloof. Thank you. Thank you, Yoru. Mei stated as she happily wrapped her arms around my neck before she looked at me questioningly. Though I have to ask why you came all the way over here, don't tell me you already missed me so much? I shook my head. My instincts warned me there was someone that could be dangerous to me here, so I hurried along. Meeting you here was a coincidence. Mei pouted. You know, when a woman asks you that sort of question, you're supposed to agree. Is that so? I stated while my brows furrowed as I looked above me and saw a white bird circling the sky. I hadn't sensed it earlier because it had been outside my detection range, but now that I was more elevated, it was clear to me now. Those bombs seemed to be made from Gari's chakra, however, I was unaware of any technique that could concentrate explosive chakra in such a manner. Is that him? Samui asked as she looked up. I nodded before inquiring, why are you 2 so far away from your team? Traveling with them would be a much safer option than traveling alone. Just like what you're doing, right? Mei asked with a teasing smile. I was just supposed to be a scout, but then I found her. Likewise, Samui replied. We were too focused on each other to realize the dangers around us, so I once again thank you, but... She narrowed her eyes. Why did you save me as well? You seem to already have a relationship with her, so that is understandable, but we have no such thing. I doubt most Konoha shinobi would save someone from Kumo. What are you after? I tightened my grip around their waists and performed evasive maneuvers as the sky became blanketed with small, white, explosive chakra bombs. The mini-bombs began to move towards me with a humming sound, and looking behind me, I noticed they appeared to be little hummingbirds. Numerous thoughts flitted through my mind. They appear to be concentrated blasts of explosion release, which is a combination of earth and lightning release. How about? From my open mouth came a large number of dense storm clouds that crackled with electricity. The clouds propagated around us and spread towards the white explosive hummingbirds. As soon as they came into contact with the storm clouds, the hummingbirds began dropping like flies. They plummeted towards the ground as electricity flickered off their form before they landed uselessly on the earth. I looked at Samui, whose expression was wide-eyed. Believe it or not, I don't really have any feelings either way towards Kumo. The only problem I had with them was with their decision-making body, hence the reason I got rid of them and didn't just nuke the entire city. Yujito was a different situation. I actually hadn't wanted to kill her, but Sage Yoru was a different story. My original idea was to blindfold her or use some other method to prevent her from seeing my face before questioning and releasing her. I personally had no grudge with her in particular. Unfortunately, Sage Yoru would never stop people from witnessing the magnificence of his presence, and he disdained to hide his face from people. As a result, Yujito saw our face and he killed her. That form of storm style. Samui muttered before staring at me seriously. Where did you learn it? I picked it up along the way, was my reply. I didn't feel like explaining how I allowed Hirako to absorb the bodies of the other 5 great ninja village's shinobi so that I could profit at his expense. She obviously didn't seem to buy it, though may seem to find it interesting as she whispered closely. How many secrets are you hiding, I wonder? Before I could answer that, not that I would have, the flying bird above began to drop before I heard a voice from it. I'm not sure whether I should be thankful towards you. If not for your existence, I never would have obtained the opportunity to use my village's kinjutsu. Gari said as he looked down from above his bird construct. He outstretched his hand, showing off the extremely out-of-place mouth on it that seemed to be chewing something. My Kage really wants you dead. I looked at him intently. My instinct was telling me that something was off with him. I wasn't going to take any chances. Sage transformation mode. Pristine white scales covered the outer portions of Yoru's face, neck, and body. A white chakra shroud formed around him, portions of it turning into ethereal snakes. 2 horns grew from the top of his head. His irises turned golden. His pupils were slit. With a thought, iron sand clouds appeared out of Yoru's inventory and formed into an imposing glittering throne which Yoru sat on, the women in his hands sitting on either side of him, Mei on his right and Samui to his left. He placed his arms around their waists and dragged their bodies closer to his own before crossing his legs. Rejoice, you have the distinct honor of sitting by my side. Yoru, gamer. Inside a small earthen-made shed courtesy of Yoru's clone, Kabuto's hands blurred rapidly as he shuffled a deck of cards, the sun's glare from the partially exposed roof reflecting off his glasses and preventing Yoru clone and Itachi from seeing his eyes. He then stopped. Caught. Itachi fiddled with the red-colored plastic card he held in his hand, his Sharingan fully activated. With a simple flick, the plastic card shot out and vertically spun across the air towards the deck before it cleanly slid into the stack of cards in Kabuto's hands. Kabuto then moved the cards above the cut card to the back of the stack. The cut card was then reinserted into the stack of cards by him at a predefined position. His glasses gleamed. Place your bets. 1,000 Ryo Yoru clone stated as he slid the appropriate amount of money in the betting circle in front of him. The table they were playing on was created with precision to match an actual blackjack table, its ridges and grooves mimicking the betting circles. 1,500 Ryo Itachi claimed as he placed his bets forward. His eyes still hidden behind his glasses glare, Kabuto dealt a single card face-up inside the betting circle starting from Itachi to Yoru then to him. He then dealt another round of cards clockwise around the table, from Itachi, Yoru, and then to him. This time, however, Kabuto's second card was face down. Yoru clone narrowed his eyes as he stared at the cards dealt. Kabuto has an ace face-up, Itachi has a pair of fives, and I have a 5 and 6. You can place an insurance bet, Kabuto stated. Itachi narrowed his eyes. Hit me. Kabuto slid another card face-up from the deck and placed it face-up on Itachi's side. A 10 for a total of 20, Yoru muttered as he looked at Itachi's hand. He then pointed at his own deck of cards, signaling Kabuto to hit him as well. Kabuto slid him a card. A 9 for a total of 20. Itachi stated as he looked at my cards. He seemed to struggle for a moment before he shook his head. I'll stand. Likewise. Yoru clone stated. The probability of Kabuto having blackjack was very slim. His glasses gleaming, Kabuto flipped his face-down card. Itachi's eyes widened. Yoru's pupils constricted. Ace counts as 11 plus the 9. We each have 20, Itachi concluded after Yoru's statement. With a sigh, each of them took back their money. Another round? Kabuto asked. Yoru and Itachi nodded. Kabuto began shuffling. Something's been bothering me. Itachi began as he looked at Yoru clone as his Sharingan spun. Where exactly did you get your money from? Yoru didn't hand any to you before he left and you keep pulling out more from somewhere. Actually, where did you even get these cards? Yoru blinked. Maybe your sight isn't as good as you think it is. Itachi narrowed his eyes. Round 2, Kabuto stated as he began to deal out the cards. Yoru clone's expression drastically changed. Move now. Even while saying that, Yoru had already been in motion as he secured them within this grasp before ramming through the shed's walls. Following his sudden movement was a spiral distortion of space that encompassed the entirety of the shed they had just been in. Before everything vanished. With his ability to fly, Yoru quickly stabilized himself mid-air before softly landing on the ground with his teammates in hand. His gaze carried such vast gravity that both Kabuto and Itachi looked ahead intensely, neither saying a word. This chakra signature. Yoru clone thought as a bead of sweat dripped down his face. Why the hell is he here now? The boss couldn't have picked a better time to ditch us. It seems like he did his job, the signal led me to the correct team after all. A deep voice tinged with indifference spoke out from within the smokescreen of the attack. Footsteps echoed loudly throughout the canyon as a man stepped out from the smoke. 30% should be enough to get rid of you, oh? The masked man stated as he looked at Itachi. He had long, black, spiky hair that reached down past his shoulders and wavered slightly in the wind. He wore an orange mask with tiger-like stripes running across it and an eye hole for his right eye. On his body, he wore blue robes, their appearance similar to those that Uchiha typically wore. Yoru clone's expression turned ugly as his eyes glowed. Obito, and he is much stronger than before. He thought while noting how similar Obito now looked like the murals depicting his predecessor, Madara Uchiha. If he hadn't already known who he was before, Yoru would have been inclined to believe he was the real deal. Itachi froze. You? What a surprise. The masked man said, though his apathetic tone belied any feelings of true astonishment. The information told me an Uchiha was part of the team, but I never would have imagined it to be you. Yoru frowned. Itachi, you know him? Itachi's Sharingan began to transform. He's the one. He said as the tomo in his eyes fused and formed into 3 spiraling curves around his pupil. The one who killed my teammates. You've developed such nice pairs of eyes, Itachi. The masked man stated as he stepped forward. Itachi's right eye began to bleed, red veins visible in his sclera. Amaterasu. A pitch-black flame instantly formed on the body of the masked man, its appearance causing Yoro-clone's instinct to prickle with danger. However, instead of burning his body to ashes, the masked man immediately phased out of his burning blue robe, leaving him with his blue skin-tight, long-sleeved, collared shirt. His robe turned to dust before it dissipated in the wind. "I don't mind getting myself an extra pair," Yoru yelled. "Itachi! Susanoo!" A large orange, half-body skeleton formed around Itachi. Muscle grew on its bone. Flesh covered its muscles. Armor protected its flesh. "Ho!" the masked man stated before he rapidly dashed towards the Uchiha. Itachi reacted quickly and brought up his Susanoo's right hand, an orange ethereal blade in its grasp. Tatsuka blade. He brought it down with staggering momentum and slammed it into the ground, a vast shockwave of force tearing through the canyon wall. Obito emerged from the dust unfazed as he blitzed towards Itachi, causing the latter's eyes to widen. "Physical attacks won't work on him yet," Yoru yelled as, from his inventory, he pulled out 4 rods of ice formed from his ice release. "Yat?" Obito thought for a brief moment before he focused on his target and outstretched his hand as he phased through Itachi's Susanoo. Time seemed to slow as his pointer finger and thumb inched closer towards Itachi's widened eyes. Yoru shot a single kunai into the air. Amanoto Kotachi. In a flash, Itachi was transferred out of his Susanoo while the kunai occupied his previous position. Yoro-clone narrowed his eyes. Explode. The kunai flashed. Before it burst, an earth-shattering explosion lit up the inside of Itachi's Susanoo and spread past it, causing turbulent winds to buffer the 3 people. His eyes squinted from the wind. Yoru maneuvered the 4 poles of ice in his grasp to shoot out towards the 4 cardinal directions around the 4 people in the canyon. No sooner had they gotten settled did a clear, visibly rippling cuboid barrier encompass the 4 of them. Kekai Fuin, barrier seal spacelock. This was what Yoru had been working on for most of his time after fighting Obito nearly 3 years ago. It was based on a principle similar to the barrier around Konoha, which prevented someone from entering the village using a spacetime technique. What was better was that it was portable in the form of the ice-release chakra rods Yoru made. Its only downside was that in order for the barrier to be portable, it had to be made simple. This meant that Yoru was currently unable to program the barrier to specifically allow him to use his spacetime techniques while he was inside. Despite this evens the playing field, Yoru stated as he stood beside Itachi, Kabuto right behind them. While this will definitely disqualify us from the Chunin exams since it isolates space, it's much better than the alternative. Itachi's eyes became more focused. Suddenly, a light blue ethereal skeletal arm shot out from the dust cloud and slammed towards the 3 genins. Itachi froze for a fraction of a second. However, his shinobi training allowed him to quickly contain his turbulent emotions and form his armored Susanoo to block the attack. The blue skeletal chakra arm bashed against Itachi's chakra avatar and sent it skidding backward across the ground. As Yoru and Kabuto were inside Itachi's protection, they hurried to stabilize him before sliding to a halt. "How?" Itachi asked as the dust parted and in view appeared the masked man with an ethereal skeleton of energy surrounding his body. The man's skeleton soon began to form strands of muscle and was composed of everything that would make up a normal human body's upper half but lacked legs. "Itachi, about this ability of yours," Yoru began as his gaze turned even more serious. "How does it manifest? Does it require both your eyes or can it be used with only one?" Yoro-clone remembered that Obito hadn't had this ability the first time they fought. It would have been a useful one to have back then. Itachi didn't answer and instead stared deeply at Yoru. "Who is he? You seem to already know about his ability, so you've met him before. How does he have my clan's ability?" Yoru grimaced. "He's a ghost that should have been exorcised a long time ago." "What have you done, Yoru?" The masked man muttered to himself as he looked down at his hand and found himself unable to use his kamui. He then stared at the group of 3. It seems like my decision to preemptively get rid of you was well-founded. You're dangerous. Kabuto suddenly stated. He's coming. The masked man suddenly appeared in front of the three Konoha shinobi before slamming the fists of his ethereal muscular avatar into Itachi. Quickly raising the shield on his hand, Itachi was barely able to intercept the attack as his feet sank into the ground. The collision between the two titans sent shockwaves that caused the entire mountain range to tremble. Deep cracks spread throughout the canyon while heaps of boulders fell down as some places were already falling apart. About my question, Itachi? You didn't answer mine. Itachi stated while he raised his Susanu's sword-bearing arm. With a short shout, he brought it down against his opponent. Right before the attack connected, the masked man widened his eyes and moved to dodge, but not before the Totsuka blade sliced off one of the arms from his muscle-formed Susanu. As the energy from his Susanu's arm was sucked into the gourd located on Itachi's Susanu, the masked man created firm distance between him and us. That blade is dangerous. Don't think that sort of cryptic answer will do it. Who is he? Itachi asked once more, his gaze severe. Yoro Clone looked profoundly at Itachi before turning back to look at the masked man, noting that the enemy's chakra avatar was now evolving and growing skin. His name is Obito Uchiha, a former shinobi of the Leaf and a member of your clan. Yoru, gamer. Sage Yoru sat somewhat disinterested as he looked above at his would-be opponent. Samui shuffled slightly in embarrassment as Yoru hugged her close while her face reddened slightly, though her expression remained relatively calm. Mei simply looked interested and amused. What's wrong? Don't tell me you've never felt the touch of a man before? She teased as she stared at Samui. I find that hard to believe. Samui slightly grimaced. For some reason whenever I meet a man, they seem to forget where my eyes are. I tend to lose interest after that. I think I can understand why. Mei stated as she stared at Samui's ample chest before looking at her own with a scowl. Even though she's younger than me. It's their loss, truly a shame. Yoro said as he stared into Samui's eyes. After all, you are one of the most beautiful creatures I have ever laid eyes on, besides myself of course. The severity and sincerity of Yoru's gaze and his attractive visage caused Samui's face to heat up, forcing her to turn away. Thank you, she said quietly. Though she felt it would have been perfect if he didn't say that last part. Gari's eyes narrowed. Is he really flirting at this time? The mouth on his palm stopped chewing. Well, whatever. The oral cavity on his hand spat out a small globular white substance that he tossed up to the sky. In a puff, it transformed into a large white clay dragon on which Gari jumped. The bird he had been previously using as a mount flew through the air towards Yoru, whose attention was wholly focused on Samui. Yoru! Mei yelled in more irritation than fear. Without even looking, Yoru waved his hand sending a gale of sharp wind that shredded up the clay bird, parallel processes having taken over Yoru's body while he was preoccupied. Immediately, Yoru's metallic throne dashed backward at Mach speeds and no sooner did the clay bird explode, sending a shockwave that caused the winds to churn. Is my face that unpleasant to look at that you'd turn away? Sage Yoru asked. Samui froze before turning back towards him. No, that's not it, I just... She paused and stared at his luminous golden eyes, noting how they never deviated from her own. She reached up with her hands and stroked Yoru's shimmering white scales. I think you're cool, she said as she lost herself in his gaze. Mei looked on in interest at how easily Yoru had captivated an enemy kunoichi in this form. He seemed to have some sort of magnetic charm that could trap people within. It was clearly unnatural. You damn child! Gari exclaimed before he raised the clay dragon higher into the air as its mouth bulged before it released three smaller-sized clay dragons, each of which aggressively charged towards Yoru. Never had Gari met an opponent so infuriatingly arrogant as to continually and actively flirt during combat. The clay dragons gilded towards Yoru's flying throne and rapidly spat out small white clay bullets. Yoru only said one word, his eyes never leaving Samui's, Livia. The snake snapped open her eyes. Her vertically slit pupils constricted. She immediately uncoiled around Yoru and shot into the sky before her body rapidly expanded. 2 horns grew out of either side of her head. Intricate golden lines formed on her body. She roared. Sage mode. Coating her now 20-meter-long body with steel release, Livia utilized magnet release to float in the air and intercepted the bullet bombs with her body. They exploded on impact but left no injuries on her person and instead only served to irritate the powerful beast. Livia took a breath. Sage art, storm style. Dense blue energy coalesced within her maw as she stared down at the 3 clay dragons charging towards her. Gari's pupils shrank as his honed instincts warned him of impending danger, causing him to immediately fly out of the line of Livia's mouth. Leviathan's breath. It was instant. At the speed of light, a tremendous beam flashed from Livia's mouth and completely erased the clay dragons from sight. They simply vanished. Before anyone could notice, the beam parted the clouds and flew out into the atmosphere. May's body trembled. That snake. It was too strong. She hadn't even really noticed it before, as it had always stayed quietly coiled and asleep around Yoru, but after seeing it in action. Cold sweat dripped down both her and Gari's forehead while the latter distanced himself before taking a breath. It seems I have to take it one step further, he stated as he climbed higher into the air. Livia, seeing as she had completed her task, exited Sage mode and flew back towards Yoru. She shrank down into the size of a finger before she nestled into Yoru's flaming hair. May stared at the snake for a moment. Yoru, where did you find Dash? She paused as she realized that his attention was still preoccupied. Ah, my apologies, Yoru stated as he looked up above. It appears that something requires my immediate attention, he concluded as he saw a gargantuan white clay statue falling towards them. Yoru uncrossed his legs and stepped forward, his body hovering in the sky. Livia, my dear, watch them for me, will you? Yoru stated as his gaze became disinterested as he looked up at his opponent. Livia hissed in affirmation and flew out of Yoru's hair before she grew slightly longer and nestled on Samui's lap. Seeing the creature on her body, Samui merely began stroking her scales while a light smile made its way on her usually indifferent visage. Yoru flew the throne away from him and stared up at the rapidly approaching bomb and realized that this sort of attack could potentially damage his scales. Sage art, lightning style. A small white nucleus crackling with electricity formed on Yoru's palm before he gently sent it up to contend with the bomb. Limelight. It burst. In a brilliant flash of light that could be seen from dozens of kilometers away, the electric nucleus detonated with such devastating force that its blast wave had encompassed an area over 5 kilometers in diameter. The thick cumulonimbus clouds in the area that had started to gather immediately dispersed from the attack. Gary's pupils shrank, however, before he could even think of his next move, a hand clasped around his neck. You've amused me for long enough, Yoru stated as he stared at the man in disregard. With sweat dripping down his face, Gary grimaced with a TSK and clasped his hands together. The giant clay dragon beneath them halted in mid-air before it lit up. It exploded with colossal force, sending plumes of smoke all around the atmosphere. Yoru suddenly shot out from the smoke cloud and dashed towards the earth over 30 kilometers below in less than a second. He slammed Gary's back into the ground, causing massive deep cracks to spread across the landscape over 100 meters around. The man coughed out globs of blood and pieces of his internal organs as his body lay unmoving beneath the rubble. I commend you for your efforts, Yoru stated simply while one of the ethereal snakes coiling around him opened its mouth towards Gary. Rejoice, you have the distinct honor of dying by my hand. Gary chuckled before his chuckles turned into full-blown laughter. Kid, you're going to die a horrific death. Is that right? Sage art, storm style. Gary simply smiled while his body became transparent, black veins clearly evident throughout his form. The veins immediately condensed into a sphere around Gary's heart. Since the moment I found out you were here, I was prepared. He laughed. I told you, you will die a horrible death. Never before had instinct screamed at him as loud as it did now. Sage Yoru's expression changed greatly. The grin never left Gaari's face. Boom! In a flash of light, an astronomical explosion enveloped Yoru and rapidly spread, the blast wave instantly vaporizing every piece of land it came across. The eruption of energy formed into a large conical-shaped explosion with two arms that could be seen in the distance, its height easily surpassing hundreds of meters. On the metallic throne, Livia instantly took control of it with magnet release and lengthened her body before wrapping around the entirety of the chair. Using steel release to fully augment herself, Livia protected Samui and Mei from the edge of the shocking blast. Powerful gale force winds rocked Livia and the throne while the expressions of the two women within were exceedingly grave. After a moment, everything stopped. Livia uncoiled herself from the throne and shortened her size before looking down at the now bare expanse of land 25 kilometers in diameter. Samui's and Mei's eyes sharpened at the scene before they stared at each other for a brief moment. An attack of such magnitude was virtually unheard of. They could not comprehend someone surviving from something like that. Samui's gaze tightened. Instantly, the throne was brought down towards the ground by Livia before it landed safely on the bare dirt. Up ahead, the three could see Yoru's upright form and the hideous state it was in. His scales were ruptured and he had numerous burns on his skin. Both of his horns were broken and his skin was splitting at numerous areas, yet despite this, he still remained standing. Is he? Samui began to ask. Mei frowned before looking at Livia to gauge the snake's reaction. Seeing the generally disinterested look she appeared to have, though it was hard to tell since she was a snake, Samui wondered if they really had such a poor relationship. Wait, that can't be right. Livia slithered over to Yoru and hissed in displeasure. I have nothing to admit. Sage Yoru stated slowly, each word taking incredible amounts of effort. In the deepest recesses of his mind, he realized that he had gotten slightly complacent, yet his arrogance would never allow such a thought to even fully conceptualize before it was destroyed. Hearing his voice caused the two women to look at each other in shock. They had no doubt they would have been vaporized by the attack, yet not only was Yoru relatively in one piece, but he was also still alive. How strong do you have to be to survive something like that? Mei thought seriously as she re-examined Yoru. Livia hissed. I apologize for making you worry. Yoru stated before he slowly turned his head towards her. However, my dear, I require your assistance. Livia scoffed. Before she slithered up Yoru's body. She opened her mouth as soon as she got to the nape of his neck before she sank her fangs into him. Immediately, vast amounts of Senjutsu chakra were pumped into Yoru's body, accelerating his already incredible healing. Due to the fact that Livia had been gifted with Yoru's blood when she was just a newborn hatchling, her energy signature was almost completely identical to his own. As a result, she could safely transfer chakra and Senjutsu chakra to him should the need for it ever arise. Suddenly from the distance, footsteps rapidly made their way towards this area. Samui's and Mei's eyes narrowed seriously as they prepared to face any enemies. The amount of noise that had been made in this direction no doubt had drawn the attention of whoever was stupid enough to come near a battle zone of such magnitude. The world had no shortage of idiots. Miss Terumi. Samui. Utakata and C yelled respectively, following behind which were their teammates. Both Mei and Samui blinked before they slightly relaxed their guard. In a few moments, the two teams coming from opposite directions reached the center where Yoru was getting treated and where Mei and Samui were located. Miss Terumi, are you okay? What happened here? Utakata asked as he stared at the now blank vast expanse of what used to be a mountainous terrain. Who could have done this? Utakata paused before he finally noticed Yoru, who was recovering in between Mei and Samui. Who is Dash? Yorodon. C stated as he stopped in front of Samui and stared at the boy behind her. What the hell happened? What caused this and why is he here? He asked in rapid succession. Seeing as Yoro was so heavily injured, he grabbed the tanto from his back, sweat dripping down his brow as his knuckles turned white. Whatever the case, now is the best dash. Stop. Samui declared simply. He saved our lives. I would appreciate it if you didn't repay that by trying to kill him. But Samui dash. I implore you to do give it a shot, Yoro stated as he turned to face C, his body now 40% healed thanks to Levia's ministrations. However, if you fail to kill me in my weakened state, the cost will be your life. He finished as his pupils constricted murderously while looking at the blonde male Kumo shinobi. C took a step back from the severity of his gaze while his breathing became heavy. Yoru, Samui said softly as she touched his arm and shook her head. He stared at her for a moment before closing his eyes. As you wish. Regardless, my presence here is no longer required. Saying so, Sage Yoro reverted back to his normal condition, his scales and horns disappearing along with his slitted eyes and white chakra shroud. His eyes opened, his irises now silver, before he sighed. I owe you an apology, Yoro said with a bow as he faced Samui. She blinked. For what? When in that state, I tend to do and say things I normally would not. If I made you uncomfortable, I'd like to apologize for that. I would understand if you would like to keep your distance from me. C frowned. Oi, what did you dash? See, Samui said coolly. He twitched but remained silent nonetheless. Your wife will definitely wear the pants in your relationship, Darui stated blandly from the side, a toothpick in his mouth. Veins protruded from C's face. Ignoring them, Samui turned to face Yoru. Please stand up. Yoro straightened his posture and stared into Samui's eyes. She looked back at him with her usual chilly gaze. They stared at each other for many moments. Samui's expression softened. Even now he's still looking at me. She thought before asking. Then, what you said? Yoru blinked. Ah, I meant what I said. I just normally wouldn't be so forward about it. I see. She said as she smiled lightly before she turned back towards her team with her usual chilly gaze, either ignoring or uncaring of their frozen expressions. Let's go. We still have to survive until this exam is over. With that, she walked past them. C's mouth hung low as his eyes nearly bulged. Darui's toothpick fell out of his mouth as he gaped slightly. Huh, I never would have thought she liked them younger dash. He immediately dodged a tanto that sliced at his face, the wind from the blade cutting off a few strands of his hair. That thing is dangerous, Samui. She gave him a disinterested glance. Pick his jaw up and let's move. Hi, Darui stated as he closed C's jaw and carried him away with Samui towards the distance. Looking at Samui's disappearing behind, it was times like these that Yoro thanked empathy that he knew enough about her emotional state to know what to say. If he's apologized for all that, she definitely wouldn't have decided to come over. Isn't that great, Yoru? Mei asked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You seem to have found a girlfriend. Yoru bowed once more. The way I disregarded you before was completely unjust and for that, I apologize. I hope you find it in your heart to forgive me, but I understand if you do not want to remain acquainted. What exactly happened? Utakata asked in bafflement. Mei ignored him and looked at Yoru before her expression crumbled. Get up, please. I really can't stay upset at you. She stated as Yoro looked back at her. I do have to wonder though why you did act that way? You seem to have some conscious understanding of your actions while in that state. Yoro scratched the back of his head. It was to make you jealous so that you'd want me more. Mei blinked. Utakata gaped. Zabuza picked his ear and flicked his pinky. Mei stayed silent for a moment before she began to laugh. That other side of you is really devious. That being said, She cupped Yoru's face into her hands. I can't say I dislike it. Will anyone explain to me what is going on? Context and whatnot. No? Utakata went ignored. Don't worry Yoru, I'll still be acquainted with you. She stated before separating herself from Yoru and turning around. Let's leave before this place is flooded with idiots too curious for their own well-being. She said as began to walk away. Utakata immediately followed behind her. Zabuza watched them go for a moment before staring at Yoru. So, you're the kid that got sent into the bingo books as an S-ranked threat at only 11 years old? Zabuza stated as he scanned Yorodon up and down. This is the first time I'm seeing you up close. There's a nice bounty on your head, you know? I know, Yoru stated simply while Livia coiled around him and rested on his shoulders. Do you want it? Zabuza chuckled and shook his head. I think I like living for now. If I ever feel like dying, I'll let you know. Yoru nodded. I'll be around. With a nod his direction, Zabuza turned away from Yoru and walked towards his team. Yoru sighed and shook his head at this entire situation before he noted that the purple barrier in the sky suddenly rippled and disappeared. Seems like my clones took care of it, huh, Livia? Hiss. Yoru stroked her gently. I wonder how Itachi and Kabuto are doing. I need to meet up with them anyhow. Suddenly, Yoru froze as a torrent of memories flooded his brain. His eyes widened. How the hell? Yoru thought as the clone that was with Itachi and Kabuto granted him its memories. Obito. Yoru's gaze then turned severe at the last few scenes. Asuna council member ha. Yoru, gamer. Minutes prior. Itachi's body froze. Obito Uchiha, that can't be possible. He's supposed to be dead? Yeah, I know. Yoru clone replied. That's why I called him a ghost, that and his bullshit ability to phase through all attacks for who knows how long. Oya hoya, this is quite the twist, Kabuto stated as he adjusted his glasses. Itachi shook his head as he gazed at Obito who was beginning to evolve his Susanoo to the muscle stage. Even if he's still alive, how can he manifest Susanoo? Wasn't his other eye with Kakashi? Yoru completed. But the village is protected by a spacetime barrier so there's no way he could sneak in and steal his Sharingan. Even if Kakashi had gone out for a mission, he's an Umbu captain right now. The missions he obtains are granted directly from the Hokage so it's near impossible for them to be intercepted. Yoru turned to face Itachi. That's why I was asking if it was possible to do that. He said, gesticulating at Obito's Susanoo, with only a single one of your bullshit eyeballs. Itachi narrowed his eyes. No. In order to first unlock Susanoo, both Mangekyo Sharingan have to be in the owner's possession. He should be unable to use it with only a single eye. Yoru clone thought for a moment before shaking his head with a sigh. A mystery for another day. Right at this moment, the masked man's Susanoo regrew its lost arm as skin fully covered its previously muscled form. He flipped through a hand seal, his chakra avatar mimicking his movement. Kabuto, stabilize Itachi with your medical ninjutsu. This thing takes a toll on his eyes. Yoru stated while he grimaced and placed a hand on Itachi's shoulder. Itachi, I'm going to help you out, so attack. As he said that, Yoru's pupils turned slit as he activated Sage Transformation, but instead of using the Senjutsu chakra for himself, he siphoned it into Itachi's Susanoo. The giant orange avatar began growing ethereal white scales on the outer portions of its body, causing Itachi's eyes to widen from the influx of powerful energy. Focus! Yoru stated as the masked man released a horrifying stream of fire towards the trio. Itachi's expression became calm as he raised the Yata mirror located on his Susanoo's left hand and negated the devastating fire attack. Immediately after, Itachi flipped through some hand seals and inhaled, his avatar following suit. Fire style, Great Fireball Jutsu. A massive ball of flame was emitted from Itachi's Susanoo and flew towards the masked man's own in blazing fury. Obito and his Susanoo flipped through a few hand seals before his chakra flared and the ground trembled. Bird hair serpent. Wood style, tree wall barrier. Countless wooden branches sprung up from the ground at high speeds and formed into a wall that the roaring ball of fire clashed against. The barrier began to splinter apart from the intensity of the attack while the flame dispersed on either side, its heat melting the solid earth and walls of the canyon. Suddenly, a shadow was cast down upon the masked man, causing him to look up above at Itachi's airborne Susanoo, both Yoro and Kabuto still present within. As it came down with surging ferocity, the masked man immediately leaped back and created some distance before the Susanoo slammed into the ground with overwhelming force. The canyon shook as a crater rapidly propagated from the point of impact while Obito softly landed some distance away. Yoro narrowed his eyes. The way he's been fighting. It wasn't really notable at first, but Yoro began to realize that Obito almost seemed to be restricting himself. It was an odd thought, but that was the general feeling he got, one that was amplified soon after Obito had upgraded his Susanoo to its skin form. Are his eyes becoming a burden, or is it something else? Regardless, Yoro has also found a weakness to Obito's seemingly impenetrable defenses. Itachi, Yoro called, gathering the Uchiha's attention. We need to get him in the air, even if it's just for a second. Distract him for just a moment. Itachi nodded seriously before in his Susanoo's hands, 3 ethereal Magatamas bound together by a single, circular thread formed. Yasaka Magatama. The shuriken-like attack was propelled towards the masked man who ducked under the attack. At that very instant, Yoro clone slapped his hands on the ground and sent a surge of energy through the earth before the ground beneath the masked man began to split. With his momentum already thrown towards the ground, the masked man was unable to react as he and his Susanoo were launched into the sky by a gigantic pillar of earth. Now! Yoro thought as the metallic particles located throughout the canyon began to surge before they gathered into the shape of a hand which pulled the masked man out of his Susanoo. Yoro promptly dashed out of Itachi's sphere of protective before a voluminous amount of energy gathered on the palm of his hand. A blaring screeching noise echoed throughout the battlefield as a Rasengan with 4 large points around its core, reminiscent of a Fuma Shuriken, formed on Yoro's hand. Wind style, Rasen Shuriken. The winds churned intensely from the mere presence of the attack before Yoro siphoned Senjutsu chakra into the attack. And threw it. In an instant it appeared in front of the masked man and bombarded him with overwhelming force, sending his body rocketing backward at high velocities. Before it burst, the central sphere of the Rasen Shuriken detonated with cataclysmic intensity, producing a vortex of wind in the immediate area. Within the vortex, countless microscopic wind blades were created that ruthlessly pierced through the masked man's body, which was floating in the center of devastating wind vortex. Seconds passed as the masked man was continuously assaulted before the wind vortex lost its energy. The masked man plopped to the ground motionlessly. Silence covered the battlefield. Did we dash? Don't say it, Kabuto stated as he cut off Itachi. He adjusted his glasses. You're only asking for something worse to happen. He turned to Yoro. What do you sense? Yoro clone nodded. We should be alright. I can't sense any chakra off of him. With that affirmation, Itachi dispersed his Susanoo. Despite the fact that he had been using it for much longer than he otherwise should have, he felt fine thanks to the regenerative effects of mystical healing. The 3 Konoha genin slowly walked towards the down form of their opponent before they stood above him. Their expressions immediately distorted. Who the hell is this? Yoro asked as he saw some middle-aged man on the floor. He wore the same clothing that the masked man had worn, except for his mask. The glare reflected strongly off of Kabuto's glasses. He is Yura, one of Sand Village's council members and a very influential member in Sunagakure. Then why is he here? What happened to the masked man? Itachi asked as his brows slightly furrowed. Some kind of technique? Maybe. Yoru began to think for a moment. Obito's conservative way of fighting. And the thing he said earlier that Yoru had barely picked up and hadn't really paid much attention to. 30% should be enough to beat you. I'm not sure. Yoru began before he stated his hypothesis. But it seems like he somehow took over this guy's body and used his abilities through him. Is such a thing really possible? Itachi asked. That's the only thing I can think of given the amount of information I have, Yoru stated. That being said, he continued as his gaze turned dark. The masked man said he had received information about our group. He most likely tracked us down through the emblem boss left you. The only question now is whether he stole it, Kabuto stated as he looked at Yura. Or whether he received it from a voluntary source. Itachi concluded. Yoru stayed silent for a moment before he took back his ice poles and placed it in his inventory. You said that we would be disqualified because of that barrier? Itachi asked. Yoru nodded. That's right, however, I already have a plan to keep us in the game, but this is the boss's problem. Yoru Clone said before he looked up at his two teammates. Later. He puffed. Yoru, gamer. In a plain concrete-floored room lit by dim flickering fire on its walls, Obito regained consciousness and opened his eyes before he simply sat on the ground silently. Did you complete it? A man with short spiky orange hair asked, his ripple-patterned purple eyes boring straight into the eye hole of the masked man's mask. Obito stayed silent a moment longer before he completed said. It was in good judgment that I went after him when I did. If not, I would have been more unfortunate than fortunate the next time we met. What do you mean? The purple-eyed individual asked. Was he truly worth us wasting such a valuable asset? It is not simple to obtain people with such high positions in their village. Believe me, it was worth it, Obito said as he stood up from the ground. If we do not get rid of him now, he will definitely become an obstacle. To us or to you? The purple-eyed man asked succinctly. Obito's gaze bore into that of the man opposite him. Believe me when I tell you that if he catches wind of even a fraction of our plans, he will pose a threat just as, if not greater than, any of that a Kage could pose, even to you. You think he can stand up to the power of a god? The man asked as he stepped forward towards Obito, looking down upon him with severity in his gaze. No one shall disrupt my plans, everyone must experience true pain. You suppose yourself a deity, Obito stated as he stepped forward threateningly. But we both know that in reality, you have the fragility of a child, your true self is merely a man, Nagato. Do not test me. The purple-eyed man stated as out of the shadows came the forms of 5 other individuals, each with rippling patterned purple eyes. Obito stared down at the Yahiko corpse Nagato used as a medium for his path of pain before he stepped back. Very well, but I'll leave you with a piece of advice, he stated as space began to vortex around him. If you ever come across Yoru and you fail to kill him. He paused as his gaze intensified. Be prepared. He vanished. Chapter 30. Up ahead on the bare expanse of dirt and sand, Kabuto, Itachi, and I saw the congregation of a handful of teams and some Sunigekure Chunin exam proctors who were checking off the teams who had passed or who had failed. In my right hand, I dragged along the corpse of the Sunigekure council member while his head hung low, face down towards the ground. The approach of our team drew the attention of everyone present and caused the gaze of one of the proctors to instantly be fixed upon us. His brows furrowed slightly as he checked something on the scroll he had in hand for a moment before he stated, Team 10. He looked up at us. Your emblem's signal went out for over 3 minutes 37 seconds. Regardless of the reason, you're disqualified. I could feel that some people from the other teams were gleeful and relieved at that fact, while only a few people seemed somewhat concerned. It was really only Mei and Samui. Is that so? I stated as I stopped and looked up to him. He frowned. The rules were explained to you in detail. Do you have a problem? Instead of answering, I unceremoniously threw the corpse I was holding towards the ground near him. It flew in a parabola before landing face up on the ground with a thud. The proctor furrowed his brows as he stared at me before he looked down. His face froze. Not only him, but the faces of the other proctors were also filled with terror and shock as they gazed upon the corpse. Isn't that? One of the other examiners began. Lord Ura. A voice that did not come from the proctors yelled out. I turned to see Maki from her Sunagakure team run over towards the corpse before she leveled her heated glare towards me. What did you do? What did I do? I asked before I gestured towards the corpse. How about, why did he come all the way over here to the exam site? I stared at her. Unless you want to suggest that I somehow left the exams barrier unnoticed, traveled back to Sunagakure unnoticed, tracked down this guy, killed him, left the village unnoticed, and somehow re-entered the barrier unnoticed all in the span of the 3 minutes and 37 seconds that my team's emblem was offline? Her expression distorted. You killed him? The proctor asked. Well, I wasn't going to stand still while he tried to kill me and my team if that was what you were asking, I explained blandly. Regardless of who it is, if you come after me with murderous intent, you better be prepared to lose your life. I then looked to the distance for a moment before taking out my team's emblem. Now then, reinstate my team. He shook his head. Even so, the rules are clear, so I'm afraid I can't do that. I can, however, take up your case to Dash. Bullshit. I stared him right in the eyes. It's abundantly clear that Sunagakure is running a pretty dirty Chunin exam, what with one of their esteemed council members attacking a team of genin during the exams they were hosting. Curious how he found us in such a large area in such a short period of time, it's almost as if he knew where we were. I concluded as I twirled the emblem on my hands. That was most likely how they kept track of the teams here. Since the emblem had a mechanism that allowed the barrier to know when one of the signals disappeared, it was likely they could track us through it as well. The proctor's eyes narrowed. Be careful who you insult, kid. And you should be careful who you threaten, scum. My eyes turned slit as my body instantly molded Senjutsu chakra, however, I didn't absorb it. Instead, I utilized the Senjutsu chakra in conjunction with my Yin release, spiritual pressure in order to create a visual representation of my killing intent that everyone in my immediate vicinity could see. For everyone around me, the work seemed to turn dark as all they could see was me and the manifestation of my killing intent, which was represented in the form of giant white snakes coiling around my body. I could see the proctor's eyes widen as the snake almost seemed to physically wrap around his body, causing his breathing to become stagnant. He saw the face of the giant illusion snake up close, its mouth open wide exposing the thick long fangs within that were dripping with venom. His pupils constricted. Before. Stop. A voice said from the distance. I instantly dropped the spiritual pressure illusion, causing the man to drop down as he gasped for air. I looked up and ahead to see a man riding on a golden cloud of dust who was followed behind by a few more shinobi who all had powerful chakra signatures. One of them, however, was more notable than the rest. Sensei! Maki yelled as she looked at Pakura who was following behind the Kazekage. She was a fair-skinned woman with pupilless brown eyes. She had green hair that she tied in a bun on top of her head with a hair needle running through it and one short and long strands of hair with orange tips framing each side of her face. She acknowledged Maki with a smile and nod before her gaze turned serious as she looked at the corpse of Yura then at me. Lord Kazekage. The proctor said in relief as he slowly stood up to the ground and bowed. The man in question lowered himself from the clouds with a frown on his face as he looked at Yura's corpse. Yura had requested and obtained access and information pertaining to the Chunin exam. Moments later, the 3 Umbu units guarding his home while he was present were found murdered. There was no evidence of forced entry, and adding to the fact the information he had obtained, I thought it prudent to come here in person as soon as possible. Then that means... Maki began as she looked at the corpse. Lord Yura, he was dash. A traitor. Pakora finished as she looked at the corpse apathetically. There's no need to refer to someone like him with honorifics. While Maki remained silent, Pakora looked up to the Kazekage, who nodded to her and looked back down at the proctors. We'll take the corpse back to the village, so you can continue with the exams. As for you, he stated as he turned to look at me. Do not assault my subordinates. Are we understood? Why don't you keep your rabid dogs on a tighter leash? I asked back. It would be a pity if they had to be put down because they didn't do what they were supposed to. Everyone's expression changed. At this moment, a crushing pressure descended upon me as the Kazekage stared at me emotionlessly, his fury churning. You will not disrespect me in my territory, he said as his pupils shrank dangerously. Are we clear? I remembered something like this. It was similar to the pressure I had sensed from the Hokage all those years ago. If I had to compare them though, even based on the fact that I had only felt a little bit of Hiruzen's, I would have to say that the third Hokage's intent was much more impactful than the fourth Kazekage's. That being said, I apologize, I said with a bow before I straightened myself and looked him in the eye. It's just that we were unjustly targeted by an outside force and got eliminated, so I let my emotions get the best of me. I sighed. I just think it sucks that we can't get reinstated into the Chunin exams even though the fault is clearly not our own. From the corner of my eye, I could see the proctor twitch. Raza, the fourth Kazekage, looked at me for a moment longer and closed his eyes for a second before he opened them and turned to the proctor. Proctor. Reinstate their team. The fault of this incident is one of our own, so I will take responsibility. Yes, Lord Kazekage. Raza then nodded and covered the corpse in a cocoon of gold sand before he levitated into the air. Pakora and the other two shinobi, who I didn't care to find out about, followed suit as they stepped on the golden dust clouds formed by the Kazekage. In just a moment, all the individuals who had arrived, and one golden coffin, flew out into the sky and disappeared in the distance. The proctor watched them leave before he turned back his gaze towards me and picked up his scroll. Due to extenuating circumstances, your team's emblem will be reinstated and you will be allowed to participate in the next stage of the exam. Any questions? Good. He said before any one of us could even say anything. I think he was still mad about the whole killing intent thing. The proctor turned around to face the remaining teams, likely noting that everyone was here. Because the first portion of the exam ended so quickly, I will now explain to you the second portion of the exam. Everyone peeled up and paid attention. The proctor continued. The second portion of this exam could possibly factor in a lot of abilities that you'll need as shinobi, ranging from espionage to torture and interrogation. I barely paid attention as my mind traveled elsewhere. Now, there are 10 teams remaining, meaning that there are 30 of you left. He began to explain. Each team has a single emblem. An emblem appeared in his hands as he continued. The main goal of this part of the exam is for each individual to secure one emblem. The atmosphere suddenly changed and I could hear the hearts of people quicken. During the second part of the exam, you and your team will remain in Sunigakure. A barrier similar to the one used here will be placed in the village, with the rules of the first exam remaining almost unchanged. If you break the emblem or lose the emblem, your team will be disqualified. Now, however, he paused as his emblem disappeared in a puff. You will be allowed to keep them in any storage mechanism you desire, and so you will not need to be worried about your emblem's signal disappearing. The only thing that matters is that you are able to present whatever emblem you have before the time limit. He scanned around. Each of you will have 1 week to gain an emblem for yourselves using any all and all means necessary, granted that you do not cause harm to the village and its people. The entirety of Sunigakure will be your testing grounds, so if you are caught leaving the village during this time period, you will be disqualified. Anything other than that is fair game. Remember, each individual in a team needs to have one emblem in order to pass. If only one member of the team had an emblem, only she will be able to go to the next round. This was devious. A team could very well split apart if whoever the supposed leader was decided to keep a hold of the team's emblem, forcing the other two members of the team to search out for other teams and steal their emblems. What was worse was that even if you did manage to find a member of an opposing team, there was no guarantee that they had the emblem and you might just end up fighting or torturing them for nothing. I soon noticed that a good portion of the groups were now on edge as they made to keep a distance from each other while the team captains prudently guarded their team's emblems. Every individual was on edge and was looking at everyone else as enemies, even those from the same teams were being looked at with untrustworthy eyes. Perhaps seeing the teams already on edge, the proctor finalized, because of the nature of this next exam and due to certain circumstances he briefly glanced my way. The second portion of the Chunin exams will start after a grace period lasting up until tomorrow at 12 a.m. This should give you and your team sufficient time to prepare. Any individual who tries to attack another team during this grace period will have the emblem they obtained rendered void and useless. Whatever happens between teams, however, is not something that we can manage. He stared at each team with hidden amusement. That is all. With that, he looked at the other proctors and they nodded and got into a formation surrounding us before flipping through a few hand seals. In but a moment, I could sense chakra flowing through the ground beneath us before we were reversed summoned back to where we came from. The other teams quickly split as soon as they arrived while the teams that had failed left somberly. However, my current foul mood had nothing to do with this situation. I held onto Itachi and Kabuto before using Yamanoto Kotachi to teleport us back to our place of dwelling. With a sigh, I sat on the edge of the living room couch and took out the emblem before levitating it absent-mindedly, the piece of metal slowly spinning around in front of me. Numerous thoughts were floating through my mind. How long have you known? Itachi asked, breaking the tense silence. Such a question without context may have seemed to be too vague for an answer, but I knew precisely what he was asking. It's been close to 3 years now. He frowned. And you didn't say anything to anyone? What was there to say? I asked. I didn't want his memory to be forever tarnished, at the very least, I could do that for her. Rin. I cared enough about her that I didn't want to know how she would react if she found out that her thought-to-be-dead kind of an ex-boyfriend tried to destroy the village and murder everyone present, she included. The silence grew between us, the only audible sound being that of the wind being picked up by the floating spinning emblem above my palm. Then, Kabuto finally spoke as he asked sincerely. What are we going to do? The emblem stopped spinning and hovered over my palm. You two are doing nothing, I stated before turning my previously absent-minded gaze to Kabuto. This is a problem that I'll deal with on my own, permanently. I looked down and clenched my fist, my bones cracking in response. Itachi's expression tightened. Kabuto's was hidden behind the glare of his glasses as he looked down slightly. The emblem dropped to my palm. Don't look so down. Here. I said as I flicked the emblem at Kabuto. With a gaze of mild surprise, he deftly caught it before looking back at me. What? I'm done with this farce, I stated as I stood up from the couch. Obito ruined my mood, and now he's become a much bigger problem than I had initially bargained for. I don't have the heart to play around in this faux exam anymore. Itachi's eyes widened. Then, you. I'm done, I said before I closed my eyes for a moment and focused. I then took out a scroll and jotted down some information on it before handing it to Itachi. Those are the locations of the chakra signatures of the remaining teams. Pick a team and scout them out. I know you'll be able to secure one of these emblems for the finals. Do you expect me to simply continue along as if nothing occurred? I shook my head. It would look bad if two Konoha shinobi quit for no reason. I'll deal with my problem, you and Kabuto deal with yours. I trust you both will be able to dominate this thing anyway. Itachi put down the scroll. Kabuto remained mute. Get some rest you two, I stated. Even though this day just started, it feels like it's been going on forever. I walked towards my room and opened its door. Win this thing, will you? I closed it behind me. Yoru, gamer. The day passed and night quickly came. Yoro sat on the bed in his room and thought and stared blankly at the wall across the room. Numerous things crossed his mind. Suddenly, his eyes regained focus. His gaze perfunctory, Yoro stood up. Livia, keep yourself hidden. The snake in question hissed in affirmation and shortened her body before hiding inside Yoru's shirt. With that, using his ID skills, Yoru vanished from the room and appeared outside Sunagakure on one of the mountains behind it, which served as part of the village's natural border and defense. At its summit, Yoru sat still for a while and closed his eyes in wait. Space fluctuated in a spiraling fashion a few meters ahead of Yoru. Out of the distortion came a man about an inch taller than him who was wearing an orange mask with black tiger-like stripes running across it. He crossed his arms as he stood, the wind causing his long black spiky hair to wave. This was the first time Yoru had seen the masked man in nearly 3 years, so he gave him an appraising glance. You've grown into a big boy now, haven't you, Obito? To Yoru's mild surprise, his empathetic ability could pick up no sign of distress or emotional turmoil from the masked man despite his identity having been revealed. He merely placed his hand on his mask and moved to take it off. You were always too intelligent, Yoru. Obito stated as his mask fully came off. And now, you've become more of a nuisance to me. Yoru's gaze tightened immensely as he gazed upon the perfect unblemished face of the Uchiha. Both of Obito's irises were red as 3 tomo were positioned around his pupil, his impassive gaze facing Yoru. There were no scars denoting any kind of evidence that half of his body had been crushed under a boulder. What was more serious to Yoru, however, was that he could still sense Hashirama's chakra signature on him. However, it now felt fully integrated into Obito's own signature. Hashirama's cells? Yoru asked directly. Obito chuckled. Ah, if only it had been that simple. I truthfully have only you to thank. Seeing Yoru frown, Obito continued. After all, if not for your ability to regrow lost appendages and heal old scars, I would have never been able to make a full recovery. Yoru's eyes widened. How? The kill switch made it really tricky, you know, Obito stated as he touched his hand to his face. But there are ways to make people do what you want without forcing them. His fist clenched, Yoru stared directly into Obito's eyes. I'm going to kill you. Well, isn't that a coincidence? Obito stated as his eyes began to morph, his tomo forming into stretched triangles evenly spaced around the pupil that each curved at the top around the eye, making it similar to a pinwheel. My feelings towards you are precisely the same. A cyan blue ethereal skeleton leisurely began to form around Obito. His gaze sharp, a white shroud of chakra slowly began to cover Yoru, scales slowly appearing on his form. What is your goal? Yoru asked. To create a world where everyone can live out their dreams, Obito replied simply. That's all. Yoru's brows furrowed. And trying to attack Minato and Kushina while letting a tailed beast loose in Konoha factored in how exactly into this grand goal of yours? You all would definitely become my biggest obstacle in completing my plan, Obito stated. I'd rather not have to deal with you if I could help it. Your goal sounds more like a children's fairy tale. Oh, I assure you. Obito stated with a grin. It's very conceivable and highly possible to complete. The energy being released from the 2 colossal forces of the shinobi world caused the winds to churn and the clouds above to vortex in a spiraling fashion reminiscent of a hurricane. The land of Sunagakure trembled in their presence as a giant cyan blue humanoid avatar formed behind Obito while a similarly sized white incorporeal snake-like avatar actualized around Sage Yoru and cast its gleaming golden eyes at the Susanoo. Lightning flashed across the sky above as the titans stared each other down. Have you ever heard of the legend of Susanoo and Yamato no Orochi? Obito asked in amusement, but seeing Sage Yoru simply look at him imperiously, he sighed. This side of you is no fun, however. He grinned as he cast an eager gaze at Yoru. I'm going to enjoy our dance. Sage Yoru narrowed his eyes. Unfortunately, that will have to wait. Obito stated somewhat regretfully as his Susanoo avatar disappeared. It turns out that making the Tsuchikage give two people his village's Kenjutsu doesn't sit well with their council members, especially when one of them is a rebellious kid and the other one is, well, dead. He looked at Yora helplessly as he emphasized that last part. Maybe I should take a page from your book and kill them all. That was you, right? The giant white serpentine avatar behind Yoru hissed dangerously at Obito, causing the Uchiha to smile. I know that despite how you act when you're like this, you wouldn't want to kill your close friend, would you? A battle between us would completely decimate this city. His grin widened. And nothing would be able to stop us. Sage Yoru closed his eyes for a moment before his energy shroud, horns, scales, and golden slitted pupils disappeared. Why did you call me out? My night was going splendidly until you decided to flare your chakra. Of course, it's to tell you where I'm going to kill you, Obito stated matter-of-factually. And you're going to readily visit your grave, that's just who you are. Yoru's glare intensified. Obito put on his mask before space-time fluctuated in a spiraling fashion on the mask's right eye hole. In a few days, I'll be taking a lovely trip around the Valley of the End. I believe our dance there will rewrite its history. Wouldn't you agree? The spiral fluctuation of space encompassed Obito before he vanished. Yoru looked at the place he had disappeared from for a moment. He's kind of a dick. Levia popped her head out of Yoru's shirt and hissed in agreement. Yoru shook his head and vanished back to his room with his ID skills. Yoru, gamer. For the next couple of days, throughout the night, I sat in concentration in my room, utilizing hyperfocus to mentally sort and compare all my skills. Numerous attack plans and skill possibilities flashed through my mind as I searched for the most effective methods in my arsenal with which to put Obito down. One problem, however, kept popping up in my mind. How could Obito cheat death? I remembered Obito saying something about costing him an eye, so it was probably safe to assume that he lost his dojutsu's capabilities after cheating death, but how the hell does it work? Looking out of my room's window, I noted that it was around late afternoon. I looked down on my lap to see Levia coiled up, peacefully sleeping. I picked her up and put her on my head before getting off my bed and walking to the room next door. After a few knocks, the door clicked and opened, showcasing Itachi Uchiha, who was behind. Itachi looked up at me curiously. Yoru, it's been a while. What do you need? Can your bullshit eyeballs cheat death? I asked, getting straight to the point. Itachi's expression became grave. I'll take that as a yes, I said with a sigh. When I fought Obito last time, he played this card and nearly killed me. I obviously left out the fact that I had actually died and that I too could cheat death. That detail wasn't important. I need to know its limits and possible counters. Itachi left his room and closed the door behind him. Izanagi, after a Sharingan user sacrifices his eye, he will be able to cheat death continuously for a set period of time. It casts an illusion over reality itself, allowing the user control over what is and is not real for as long as Izanagi is active. They can negate any injuries they receive or even their deaths. After that, they will be rendered blind in the sacrificed eye and will no longer have access to their Sharingan with it. Itachi sighed. My father told me stories about how members of my clan abused it until a counter for the technique Izanami was created to punish those who abused Izanagi. I ran my hands through my hair in exasperation. And I'm guessing only an Uchiha can use that technique? Itachi nodded. I exhaled loudly. Your clan's eyes make no fucking sense. First, you can summon a gigantic avatar to fight for you out of nowhere, and now you can also make reality your bitch? I looked at him and shook my head. Such bullshit. But it all comes at a price. Itachi stated softly. Every ability we gain costs us something that we'll likely never get back. I paused and looked at the Uchiha deeply. Thank you, Itachi, At least I have some more information in my belt. Why are you trying to do this alone? He asked seriously. You're not the only one who has people they want to protect. I smiled lightly. You still have that dream of stopping all war between the nations? Itachi's eyes widened. I patted his head. There's no need to sacrifice yourself in this battle, just stay home and protect your mother for me. Itachi had remained quiet until that last part, after which he slapped my hand off his head. You don't need to tell me. I don't forget what I promised you that day, I said as I turned away from him. Just thought I'd let you know. You sound like you're going to be away for a while. Yeah, well. I began with a short exhale. After I do what I need to do, Minato will be able to find the biggest clue. I looked back at Itachi. After that, I think I'll need to give him and Kushina some space after. What clue? Itachi asked. And what are you going to do? I shook my head. There's no need to worry about it now. Your dad will probably know when it happens and you'll hear about it then. I said as I turned away to walk out the door. Just remember to win this and finally become a Chunin. Where are you going? For a drink, I said. With that, I left the building and breathed out heavily before beginning to traverse the village. I noted how dense the activity around Sunagakure still was as he walked around. Soon after, I found himself in front of a bar with a signboard of a scorpion hanging above. Scorpion's poison, huh? This should have the strongest shit. I entered the establishment and walked towards the counter. Probably due to the fact that I appeared much older than I actually was, many people only gave me a fleeting glance. Though, there were a good amount of individuals who were looking at me with some peculiar gazes. I was sure it wasn't because of my bounty this time, because the people here didn't even have that much chakra and were almost likely civilians. What use would they even have for a bingo book? It was definitely because I was handsome. The bartender paused as he stared at me for a moment before he raised a brow. Is your pet snake going to cause any trouble? Oh, that's why. I took Levia off my head and placed her in my shirt. Just get me some shit. Anything. Anything in particular? The man asked questioningly. I shook my head. As long as it burns. The bartender placed down the cup he was cleaning and looked at me deeply for a moment before he nodded in understanding. Coming right up. Just don't get too rowdy when you've had too much to drink, else I'll have to kick you out. I chuckled lightly. Believe me, my body can never have too much to drink. The man scoffed and turned around before grabbing a bottle of hard liquor from his cabinet and pouring it into the clean shot glass. Sure thing, kid. Don't let me find you passed out drunk or puking in my bar. I grabbed the glass and downed it in one gulp, feeling the scorching alcohol slide down my throat for a moment before the feeling completely disappeared. It was more than likely that Gamer's body either treated this stuff as toxins or simply metabolized alcohol too quickly for me to get drunk. I raised the glass and placed it down on the counter. Another. The man raised his brows before chuckling lightly. That was one of my strongest ones and you didn't even flinch. He then took my glass and handed me the bottle. You seem like you'll need it. Thanks, I said, raising it to him before taking a few chugs of the burning liquid. It tastes terrible. How can people do this so often? The man shrugged and began wiping the counter. It reminds them of how their life feels, but it makes it numb. I said before chugging more alcohol. Even though I couldn't get drunk, getting slightly buzzed for the briefest of moments wasn't out of the question. Stupid Obito making things difficult, why couldn't he just stay dead? With that, I took another sip. And another. And another. Until the bottle was finished. I eyed the whole of the empty bottle and sighed. Can I get another one? The bartender blinked a few times and slowly handed me another one. Cheers, I said as I told another sip. Fucking Obito with his stupid fancy eyes. And another. He thinks he's the shit with his dumb Susanoo and his bullshit intangibility. And another. And now, I'm going to have to kill him. Suddenly, behind me, the doors to the pub opened. The pub instantly became silent. Even the bartender straightened his posture. The sound of heels clanking against wooden floors echoed throughout the establishment as an individual made their way over to my direction. I paused the bottle midway to my mouth and placed it down on the counter as the person in question sat down beside me. I didn't need to look to know who it was since I could remember their chakra signature. What's the strongest drink you have? A charming voice sounded out next to me. The bartender looked between me and her before saying, well, it would be the one he has in his hands. Is that so? The voice said before its owner turned towards me. You mind sharing a little? I took another gulp and placed the small bottle on the table before sliding it over. What brings someone like you here, May? May smiled and took a sip with her bright red lips before she licked them. Let's see, a couple of days ago I met this guy who I found pretty interesting. We talked for a bit and I thought we had a decent thing going until he decided to ghost me for a couple of days. She said as he lightly swirled the small bottle in her hands. The bartender raised a brow as he looked at me as if saying, really? Before he shook his head and went on to continue cleaning his station. I gave him a dry look before sighing. I don't have much of an excuse, it's just that something annoying came up during the exams and it's been putting me off ever since. I turned to look at her. How did you find me here? May crossed her legs as she continued to swirl the bottle. Your adorable little friend told me that I would be able to find you in one of these places. What was his name again? Itachi. She placed the bottle down and smiled. I got lucky that it didn't take me too long to find you. Now tell me, what's bothering you? I was told your mood was quite sour and by the fact that you're here, it must be really bad. I took the bottle and looked inside at its contents. Let's just say that a ghost recently came back to haunt me and I'm preparing to exorcise it. She looked at me with a raised brow. Ooh-ha! I smiled as I took a swig from the bottle before sighing. Basically, I met an old acquaintance who I thought was dead. Turns out he's alive and he wants to kill me for reasons that I can't really talk about. May raised her brows and blinked a few times before chuckling a little. Wow, that's rough, I'm sorry to hear. How close were you? Close enough that I could barely consider him a friend. From the way you're acting, it sounds like he was more than just barely your friend, May stated as she took the bottle from my hand. You seem to really not want to confront him. I shook my head. No, I'll have no issue killing him. She blinked. Oh. It's just. I paused and looked up at the ceiling. The aftermath, it's going to send me away for a bit. I sighed. But there's a lot of people I'm going to miss here and there's a few things I haven't even been able to experience yet. I said before I took back the bottle and gulped it down. May placed a finger on her lips in interest, like what? Well, I've never been to school, I said with a chuckle. Really? She said before she placed her hand on mine and brought down the bottle to the table. What else? I pursued my lips. Well, I've never been to a party. Bummer, May said softly as she slowly trailed her hand up my arm. But is there anything that you really want to experience but just haven't had the opportunity to? I tapped my finger on the table in thought. Yoru, gamer. The door to May's room was slammed open, inviting two aggressively tangled bodies into its confines. Lips were sealed and resealed together as Yoru and May's mouths fiercely battled against each other. Near reflexively, Yoru used magnet release to manipulate the door handle and shut it behind him. As their clothes began to fall off, Yoru picked her up and pushed May up against the wall before sucking on her neck. Her legs wrapped around him, she tightly grabbed the back of Yoru's hair and moaned at his touch before she bit her lip softly as his hands roamed up her sides. Yoru then sat on the bed, May on top of him, as he began to run his hands up her finely toned body before he felt her soft orbs of flesh and squeezed. She moaned as they kissed while she ground her hips against his, causing Yoru's excitement to visibly elevate. His eyes glowed as he located all of May's weak points before he slipped his fingers into her wet canal. The thing about the weak points found by deconstructive analysis was that while they hurt immensely if they were targeted aggressively, as long as they were stimulated with just the right amount of pressure and chakra. May's eyes widened as her body suddenly shuddered and her lower half clamped tightly on Yoru's finger before she gave a short scream. Like a dam had burst, her lower lips expelled fluids all over the bed for moments that to her felt like an eternity. As she slumped slightly, Yoru overturned their positions and stood atop her, May's body facing up. His eyes remained glowing as Yoru scanned her body and noted her labored breath, every inhale and exhale causing her ample chest to heave. "You are truly beautiful." Through her blurry gaze, May smiled at him before gently running her hand through the side of Yoru's face. "Then, what are you waiting for?" Yoru smiled. "I fucking love you, Itachi." This was bound to be a long night. As for where Livia was in all this. Yoru, gamer. Itachi sat on the edge of his room's window and looked up to the full moon sky before a small smile graced his lips. "If you're here, it must have worked out," he said as he looked down on his lap. Livia opened one of her eyes and hissed before closing them. Itachi petted Livia's scales. "I wish I could understand what you were saying." Yoru, gamer. I slowly sat up from the bed and looked to my right where May was sleeping with a peaceful blush on her face. I looked out at the sky and noted that it was almost midnight. I sighed lightly. It was a dick move for a guy to just up and leave a woman without notice after spending the night in her company, but there was something I needed to do. That being said, I would at least leave her something. I took out a piece of paper from my handy-dandy inventory and wrote down a short note before I placed it on the side of the bed. Of course, this alone wasn't going to be enough. I needed to leave her with something memorable. A thought came to mind. This should be interesting. I first formed a hollow flower of ice through ice release before I filled it with lava from lava release, creating a glowing crystal flower filled with lava. The intense light from the molten lava and the crystalline structure of the ice flower created a picturesque light show that illuminated the room like a disco ball except, better. I placed a few seals on it to prevent the lava from solidifying and to prevent the ice from melting. They were formed from my energy, after all, so I could at least do this much. With that, I folded the paper note and placed the flower inside so that the light show wouldn't wake her up. I then looked at her gorgeous face and parted a few strands of her hair before I kissed her deeply. She moaned and subconsciously responded to my affection, causing my lower body to get active again. Fucking gamer's body, I thought as I regretfully separated from her. Even though we had gone several rounds, my body literally did not get exhausted. It was like I was automatically replenished after each burst. First you don't let me die from getting my organs painfully torn out, then you prevent me from getting drunk, and now you give me an everlasting case of blue balls every time I get some. I thought with irritation as I entered an empty ID so that I wouldn't disturb May as I got out of the bed. I put on some henge clothing before I hit into my thumb and drew a line of blood across the coiling snake tattoo on my right wrist. I slapped my palm on my wrist. Cuchillos. In a puff of smoke, Livia appeared on my wrist. Since IDs were basically just superimposed mirror realities, they were connected so it didn't block me from summoning Livia if I needed to. She looked at me and hissed. I nodded. I am all set here, girl. Just a few more stops before we get on our way. She coiled around me and rested on my shoulder before licking my face. I scratched her head. Don't worry about me, I'll get over it. How are Itachi and Kabuto? Hiss. Good, I replied with a nod. They deserve the rest. With that, I left the room and looked to the sky before rocketing off into the air. My body quickly catapulted through the sky as I traveled back to Konoha through my ID. It took me a little while before I could see the village in the distance. Because of the existence of the spacetime barrier surrounding Konoha, even if I entered the village on foot while inside my ID, as soon as I tried to escape the ID, the spatial fluctuations would cause the barrier to throw me out. Therefore, I landed on the ground and exited the ID. There were very few back entrances to the village that only a handful of high-ranking individuals knew about. They were mostly used in emergencies, hence why I never bothered to use them, until now of course. Using such an entrance located a few miles off the east gate of the village, I arrived within Konoha. Like a ghost, I rapidly traveled through the village before I arrived upon my apartment complex. Using my stealth skills, I went into my teacher's apartment and snuck past her traps before going into her room. Seeing her sleeping peacefully, I simply gave her a kiss on her forehead before I disappeared out of the room and the complex. Everything up till now had basically started with her. She was kind of like a big sister to me in a way. I looked up again at the sky for a brief instant before I moved to stealthily traverse across the village. I soon came across the Uzumaki Namake's household and stood at the front door. I could sense that Kushina's chakra signature was stable and fluctuations rhythmically, indicating that she was sleeping. Minato was still at the Hokage office, most likely doing his Hokage duties. Opening the door with my chakra signature, I went into the house and quietly made my way up to Mito's room to find her sleeping there with the necklace I had made her around her neck. I hovered over her form for a beat before I gently picked her up, making sure to keep her from waking up. She's so adorable when she sleeps. PD. In a flash, I appeared inside the vast white expanse of my personal dimension. From my inventory, I took out a ceremonial altar in the center of which was a bed that I placed her on. I gently stroked her hair, causing her to shuffle slightly. This little munchkin was sleeping in a fetal position. So damn cute. I sighed. For these past few years, I've been thinking about what I wanted to do with you, Matatabi. I turned around to look at the giant blue flaming cat creature that was laying on the ground and looking at me somewhat expectantly while waving her tails. Please, anything could be better than staying here, it's just so boring and empty, she said before she slightly peeled up as she tilted her head to look at Mito. Are you going to seal me in that little thing? I nodded. You don't sound too unwilling. The cat yawned, showing off its fangs. Killing you would probably just trap me here, and there's also the question if I would even be able to. Even besides that. The cat rested her chin on the back of her paws. Hashirama caught me during one of my decade-long cat naps. Point is that I don't really do much out in the wild. As a matter of fact, I found my human hosts much more interesting than anything I could do alone. What is that phrase you all use? Curiosity killed the cat? She happily wagged her tails. Ha! I'm still surprised about how you've been taking Yujito's death. You humans die all the time. The cat began. I loved Ni, I really did, always trying to prove herself and everything, but something like this was bound to happen. You all seem to have some kind of sick fascination with killing each other, but that is also part of what I find interesting about you all. This was going much smoother than I thought it would. I raised both my brows. You're much different than that ape. Son? She questioned with a bored yawn. He had a few moments of freedom before he got himself sealed inside a baby of all creatures. That arrogant monkey had it coming. She laughed derisively. I wonder how crappy he feels now that he's stuck in the body of a creature so weak. His pride must be shattered. I watched her for a moment before my expression softened. I could empathetically sense that she had no true ill feelings, just true curiosity. Protect her for me, I asked. I'm going to be out for a while. Matatabi perked up. This is a first. She began as she appraised me. I've always ever been sealed inside a human to be used to hurt other individuals. I've never been sealed to protect something. Saying so, she stood up and walked closer towards me before laying down only a few feet away from Mito and me. Take care of her. I will, this kitten is much too adorable for me to lose. She is, isn't she? I said before I saw Mito's body begin to stir. My eyes glowing, I sent chakra through her system and targeted the chakra centers in her brain, causing her to relax once more. I then placed my hand on Matatabi, idly noting that the flame covering her body was pretty hot and quite painful to the touch. From our point of contact, rows of Fuinjutsu script spread throughout her body. Meanwhile, the Fuinjutsu formula for the 4-symbol seal appeared on Mito's stomach. Soon red chakra was expelled from Matatabi and sucked into the seal, causing her body to decrease in size until she was fully absorbed. And then everything was silent. I carefully picked Mito up and wrapped her with a blanket before I went into my empty ID. Then, I exited the village and left the ID before sneaking back into the village through one of its hidden entrances and again making my way to the Uzumaki Namake's household, all the while making sure Mito remained asleep. God, this is so inconvenient. I thought with a sigh as I finally placed down Mito on her bed. If I had tried to exit the PD while inside the village, not only would I have been launched out by the spacetime barrier, I also would have triggered the barrier's alarm system, which would defeat the entire purpose of me coming here quietly. I softly tucked her in with a blanket before I took out some of the trinkets I had gotten from Sunagakure and placed it on the table by her bedside. I figured she'd have much more as a use for it than me. Then, I perked up. Yoru, what are you doing here? Kushina asked from the door to Mito's room. I thought you were still in the exams. I stood up. Something came up, so I wanted to see her again, I said as I turned around. Kushina frowned. What's wrong? I really like you, Kushina, I said as I walked towards her and gave her a hug. I always feel at home when I'm around you, even when you irritate me. You're like the closest thing to a mother that I've ever had, and for that, I want to thank you. Her body froze as she slowly reciprocated my hug. Why are you? I'm just telling you now, before I piss you off, I said wryly. Yoru, there is nothing you could do that would make me actually mad. I chuckled. We'll see. She separated from me and furrowed her brows as she looked up at my face. What the hell are you planning on doing? As I said, something that will annoy you greatly. Before she could react, my eyes glowed as I used 2 fingers to jab at the weak point on her neck. With her defenses being lax, she was unable to stop the invasion of my chakra in time before her body suddenly slumped as she fell asleep. Make that one of many things. I carried her back to her room and opened the door to see Naruto standing on the bed and rubbing his eyes groggily. I placed Kushina down and covered her body with blankets. Mommy, Naruto said as he gazed at Kushina's unconscious form. She's fine, I said as I patted his head. She's just a little tired. He crawled to her side and lay down next to her. I looked him in the eye. Take care of your mom and your big sis, alright kiddo? Naruto looked at her before looking at me with a serious gaze that on him only looked adorable. HN, he said with a nod. I stuck out my pinky. You gotta promise. There was no hesitation as he wrapped his pinky around mine and shook. I'll always protect mommy and big sister Mito. I smiled and rubbed his head. I don't doubt you will. Get some sleep, I said as I turned around to leave. And try to contain your mom's wrath tomorrow morning. I left and closed the door behind me. With that, I exited the home and stealthily left the village before my gaze sharpened. I didn't use a henge this time as I put on my Umbu gear. Since I had still done missions for them, my gear had been upgraded along with my growing size. I donned my gray flak jacket on top of my dark sleeveless undershirt before slipping on my black gloves that reached above my elbow. I attached the metal arm guards to my arms and pulled up the excess cloth of my undershirt to cover the lower portion of my face up to my nose. Engraved on my right shoulder was the natural healing seal I had developed all those years ago. On my left deltoid was the signature Konoha Umbu tattoo that resembled a red flame. That made 4 tattoos total, including the snake summoning tattoo on my right wrist and the cursed tongue seal on my tongue. Am I getting addicted to these things? Hopefully I'm not encouraging Mito to get them. At that thought, I focused on the Yamanoto Kotachi's signal I had kept on Obito and followed it. "You ready, girl?" Hiss. I dashed into the forest and traversed towards my destination. The only reason I had not bothered to contact Obito directly in these past few years was that I hadn't had any confidence in beating him as long as he could phase through my attacks. I had spent most of my time creating spacelock for the very purpose of the evening the playing field. I had hoped to be able to enjoy trashing people during the Chunin exams before I went off to deal with him, but his sudden appearance had made it evident that I couldn't wait any longer. My eyes narrowed. He's really here, I thought as I gazed at the two statues depicting Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju. Upon Madara's head, Obito stood there silently with what a gunbai on his back. The weapon was a wide fan with tomo on it and had a long handle with bandages wrapped around the base. At its end, it had a long chain attached to it, at the other end of which was a sickle. I paused for a moment and whispered to Livia, who was in my shirt, "Take these and hide. You know what to do," I said as I pulled out the 4 ice rods from my inventory. Livia looked at me somewhat worried before she nodded and swallowed them. She then slithered out of my clothing and burrowed underground. After watching her disappear, I narrowed my eyes and entered my ID before appearing on the Madara statue. Dense amounts of energy coalesced within my palm as a fiercely screeching, powerfully spinning, blue ball of chakra formed on the palms of my hands. I exited my ID. Raisin Shuriken. The attack blasted Obito in the back, however, the reaction I expected did not occur. The force of the attack threw him forward, but the war fan on his back deflected the attack away, causing it to explode in a massive blue orb of energy in the opposite distance. Obito flipped in midair before he landed on the Hashirama statue's fingertip. That wasn't a pleasant greeting. I glanced at him stoically and jumped down onto the tips of Madara's fingers. It would have sent you off pretty nicely though. Obito removed his mask before tossing it aside. He grabbed the handle of his war fan and unsheathed it from his back before staring me down with a smile. Let's get on with this dance, shall we? Yoru, gamer. Obito and Yoro stared at each other from across the fingertips of the two great statues, their hair waving in the wind. Then they moved. With a single hand seal, Obito expelled a great orange stream of fire towards Yoro, who responded by expelling an equally tremendous torrent of white flames. The attacks collided with monstrous intensity, the heat of which caused the air to visibly distort while their luminosity shone so lustrously that it lay visible in the night sky for kilometers away. Yoru abruptly launched off the statue and outstretched his right hand as he pierced through the flaming attack. The surging flames were absorbed by the dark release mark on his palm until Yoru promptly reached the attack's source and stared down at the wide-eyed Obito before mercilessly smashing his mouth shut. The force of Yoru's explosively surging forward momentum caused Obito's body to crash through multiple layers of the statue, the structure trembling as a result as fractures spread throughout. His gaze portraying intense fury, Yoru burst out the other end of the statue and smashed Obito's face into the valley wall. He flew upwards with a burst of speed, mercilessly dragging Obito's face through the solid stone, causing debris to splinter out of along the way. The Uchiha's face warped with rage. Right before Yoro reached the summit of the valley, Obito slammed his fist against its wall, thick roots furiously erupting in response. The powerful wooden appendages slammed into Yoru and crashed his body into the opposite valley wall. His gunbai and sickle in hand, Obito dashed across the tree roots that were acting like a bridge between the two valley ends. He raised his sickle before, in a flicker, Obito arrived in front of Yoru, who was pinned against the canyon wall by the roots. He mercilessly brought his weapon down towards Yoru's head. Yoru immediately accessed his inventory inside his mouth and spit out a kunai that jet past Obito's cheek, a small thin line of blood spurting from his face. Yamanoto Kotachi. Just as the bladed weapon was a hair's breadth from cracking his cranium, in a flash, Yoru switched spatial positions with the kunai and appeared behind Obito. A grand flaming ball formed above his palm in a bursting pulsating fashion. Scorch style, great steaming explosive blast. Yoru brought down his arm. The blazing ball of energy crashed into Obito's body, the Uchiha's forward attack momentum preventing him from reacting to the attack. He was blasted into the lake of the valley floor below before the energy from the blast erupted violently. In an instant, the lake water below was completely vaporized. The waterfall continued to drip. Yoru landed on the solid earth that used to contain water as he peered through the steam that obscured his view. A gale of wind abruptly dispersed the steam. Obito returned his gunbai to its resting position by his side, a cyan-blue ethereal ribcage surrounding his body. Yoru's gaze remained impassive. He took a step forward. Swift release. And blurred. X3. The ground beneath Yoru caved beneath his feet as he burst forward with explosive force. In an instant, he was right above Obito's Susanoo ribcage, his fist cocked back and his gaze steeled. Chakra built up in his fists. Immense wind pressure visibly gathered on Yoru's fist as he brought it down. Obito's pupils constricted and he quickly released more chakra and braced for the impact, his Susanoo now formed into a half-skeleton. They collided. With colossal force, Yoru released the gathered chakra on impact with the Susanoo, instantly smacking it into the ground and shattering its bony structure. Obito's eyes widened from the incredible force of the impact as his back wrecked the ground below. His body cratered the earth and caused cracks to spread from his back's point of impact to the ground. The valley trembled and cracks ran up the walls of the valley of the end, causing huge chunks of debris to crash into the now bare ground below. Yoru's hand reached down past the shattered ethereal skeletal ribs as he grabbed Obito's down form by the scruff of his shirt. Yoru's forehead gleamed with a silver metallic hue before he bashed it against Obito's face, causing blood to spurt out. Why? Yoru asked placidly as he looked down at Obito with slightly furrowed brows. No matter how much I think about it, I cannot understand why you turned out this way. A short, barely visible, burst of steam accompanied Obito's closing wounds as he grinned. Don't tell you're showing emotion, you toaster? Yoru's brows twitched. A sickle in grasp, Obito ferociously swung his arm upward, the blade gleaming in the moonlight. Yoru reacted immediately and moved to halt the advancement of the attack with his steel release-coated hands. However, the blade's sharpness surpassed his expectation. The sound of metal sliding against metal reverberated against the valley walls as the scythe tore into Yoru's palm, his eyes marginally widened, fresh blood flowing down the blade. Using this moment, Obito repulsed himself by kicking off of Yoru's chest, tearing the shirt that was in Yoru's grasp. In the same movement, with his hand firmly clasped around the chain, Obito yanked, the blade slicing through Yoru's fingers. Simultaneously, Obito made a single hand seal and shot out a scorching orb from his mouth while sequentially swinging his gunbai at the attack, utilizing a spinning momentum to augment the tempest that blew forward and excited the ball of flame resulting in its expansion. Every movement happened successively in a synchronized flowing motion. The flaming orb encompassed Yoru's view as it approached to consume him. Yoru shot out his uninjured right arm. Flesh and fire made intimate contact as Yoru sought to absorb the energy of the devastating fire with his dark release. The sheer magnitude of the impact caused his body to slide back, but he quickly gained ground as the earth gave way like dough under his heavy steps and caused his feet to sink within. A chain-attached sickle shot out from the fire. Time slowed down in his view. Yoru pivoted his body 90 degrees, sliding his right foot back across the ground. The blade flew merely millimeters past his face, short strands of his hair sheared from the armament. Just as the sickle whistled by, Obito pulled back the chain, propelling it backward, the weapon's crescent blade poised to decapitate. Yoru snagged the tool's handle from midair and utilized magnet release on the chain to careen Obito towards him. Predictable, Obito stated as he smashed down on Yoru with the edge of his gunbai. Yoru raised the sickle with his free hand to negate the impact, but his body was sent crashing back first into the ground, sinking beneath it as if it were clay. Using the sickle in his single working hand, Yoru pushed back against the weight of Obito's gunbai as the weapon pushed down against the sickle. Its honed blade threatened to slit Yoru's throat. His two hands on the gunbai's handle, Obito strained to push the arched blade of the sickle down into Yoru. Obito's expression of assuredness fueled his bulging arms to exert more pressure below. Yoru's body began to sink deeper into the ground, fracturing it further. They were deadlocked. Yoru looked up at Obito lightly, uncaring of the severity of the situation he was in. "They treated you as family," he stated softly. Obito's expression staggered for the briefest of moments. Utilizing this instant, Yoru's now healed left fist suddenly connected intimately with Obito's jaw. Obito's head whipped back with a snap as he was catapulted across the bare landscape of the vaporized lake and bounced through it like a skidding pebble. Yoru flashed. Swift release. And abruptly appeared in front of him. "Minato was like a father to you." Yoru sank his steel release knuckles into Obito's throat, the Uchiha's eyes widening in pain as he coughed harshly, before his body was brutally thrashed against the valley wall. Yoru's body blurred once more. Swift release. Kushina like a mother. Yoru grabbed both sides of Obito's face before he rammed his knee into the Uchiha's nose, shattering it mercilessly and sending his body barreling into the air. At the same instant, Yoru leaped off the ground and materialized in front of Obito once more. The Uchiha's gaze was disoriented as his eyes rolled to the back of his head. "Kakashi!" Yoru began as he grasped Obito's face in midair with his right palm. "A brother." It was as if a million paper bombs erupted at once as an all-consuming eruption of heat and energy burst from Yoru's palm as he utilized explosion release. The fire expunged from Yoru's hand was concentrated in the likeness of a blowtorch as it scorched Obito's face beyond recognition. After a moment, he stopped. Smoke discharged from Obito's near completely burnt-off skull. "You betrayed them all." Yoru released his grip, Obito's body flimsily collapsing to the ground. Yoru looked at Obito's corpse unemotionally before he began saying, "But you know who you would have hurt the most if they found out what you had become?" Yoru asked as turned around at the same moment that Obito's corpse dissipated like an illusion. "Rin." Instantly, the atmosphere coagulated. "Shut up," Obito said calmly, too calmly as he gazed at Yoru with such intensity that his eyes almost seemed to penetrate through him. "You don't get to say her name." Yoru's expression stiffened. He heard his heartbeat in his chest. He felt it. A horrifying aura descended upon Yoru as both Obito's Manjikyu Sharingan gleamed airily in the full moon's light. Yoru could feel the malevolent feelings within Obito's energy twist and swirl around him. Before they burst. The earth quaked as massive volumes of darkish cyan blue energy coalesced around Obito's form. A gargantuan 100-meter colossal avatar of energy actualized, the sheer energy from its formation catalyzing the ruination of the valley as large fissures expanded throughout its walls. Obito's body rose towards the center of the bipedal ethereal armored warrior as he glanced down at Yoru. Yoru looked up, his countenance grim, as he realized that both Obito's eyes were still well and fine despite him having no doubt used one to cheat death. What the hell is happening? A chill emanated from Obito's gaze as he commanded his full humanoid armored Susanoo to raise up high the blade of aura it held. The mere action generated tempestuous winds so grand that Yoru's body inevitably slid back as the avatar began to elevate its sword. The power from its ascent caused the clouds above split in two before the chakra sword reached its apex. It was like time became static. Obito's malevolent glacial gaze peered down below at his target who appeared merely as an ant from his dominant vantage position. Before he brought it down. With a quiet sigh, Yoru looked up and witnessed the air beneath the blade distort as it descended with indomitable power. Time seemed to slow down in his view as Yoru closed his eyes. "You?" And Sage Yoru opened them. "Scum!" With a crash, the Susanoo sword blasted the ground to the area where Yoru was in, the raw energy from the blade slicing up the valley in two right down the middle. No form of joy was evident on Obito's face as he looked up ahead of him to witness Yoru floating in the air indifferently, his gaze leveled with Obito's own. Yoru suddenly looked up towards the sky as he now sensed an individual within his detection range, his gaze seemingly penetrating through the layers of clouds and into the stratosphere. Yoru's lips twitched upwards in a half-hearted smile for a short moment before he turned back to face Obito. No matter how many piles of scum line up in front of me. Yoru began as colossal amounts of magnetic particle dust gathered from below the earth and circled around him in numerous bands. It doesn't change the fact that you are all fundamentally worthless. The particles merged together under Yoru's command and formed a throne on which Yoru sat and crossed his legs. What was that saying you apparently used right before you rushed towards your supposed death? Yoru asked in faux intrigue. Obito's expression twisted in rage before his Susanoo wrenched a long, thick, Magatama-bound ethereal string from the palms of its hands. Yoru pointed a finger in the air. Those who break the rules are scum. A minuscule pure shining dot of light, akin to a firefly, emerged on the tip of Yoru's finger. Before it expanded. In a big bang of energy, the firefly transformed into the sun as the shining dot exponentially enlarged to immense proportions, its diameter no less than half the Susanoo size. But those who betray their comrades are worse than scum. Yoru tilted his head in amusement. I wonder then, does that make you super scum? Obito gave a shout as he hurled the Yasaka Magatama, the depths of his fury evident given by how quickly it propelled towards Yoru. The sage's expression turned neutral and he bent his index finger down. Noble son. The white, sun-like ball of energy traveled forward to meet with the Magatama beads in midair. And then they made contact. As soon as the Yasaka Magatama touched the sun, time seemed to pause for a moment. There was a flash of light. Then an explosion. The shockwave from the blast was so immense that Yoru quickly formed a spherical shield of chakra-enhanced metallic dust around his body to protect himself. The turbulence from the surges of wind caused cracks to form in Yoru's defenses, however, his expression remained calm as the tempestuous storm of energy halted. Sage Yoru's eyes slowly magnified in incredulity. It was too unexpected. Faster than he could respond, two large black shuriken, reminiscent of Obito's Mangekyo Sharingan, sliced through both ends of his metallic sphere shield as if it was nothing but air. And cut off his arms. Those weren't normal shuriken. An ethereal sword suddenly appeared in front of Yoru and pierced through his chest. His form plummeted downward with the sword still lodged in his body before he was pinned to the ground below, blood dribbling from his lips. Ouch! Yoru thought with a grimace as Obito looked down at him from above. Obito sunk his blade deeper, the sheer width of which threatened to bisect Yoru. You failed to save her, even though you should have been able to. Time seemed to become static to Yoru. Slowly, his expression became solemn. Not much context was needed in order for him to understand who her referred to. Thoughts, multitudinous as the stars, swirled like a hurricane inside Yoru's mind. It was as if pieces of a giant puzzle began to come together and fit in perfectly. And he finally understood. You, fool! Yoru said as he coughed out blood. All of this, because of a woman. If that's all you have to say. Obito stated as the grip on his Susanoo sword tightened. Then die. Yoru's expression became placid. Levia. The ground trembled and quaked as a whirlpool of metallic sand spun underneath the Susanoo, the Titan's body staggering from its disproportionate position on the earth. Obito's expression faltered from the sudden reversal of the situation before he looked down to see a ball of light shining from below the metallic sand dune. And all he saw was a flash. Sage art, storm style, Leviathan's breath. A beam, as fast as light, struck the Susanoo on its sternum, the attack forcing it completely off balance and causing its gigantic body to fall backward. As Obito tried to keep himself balanced, Levia shrunk herself and dashed towards Yoru before sinking her fangs in his neck. In but a few moments, his limbs regrew completely. Sage Yoru stood up and rubbed his arms and wrists testily before he glanced down at Levia. My dear, you should get away from here. He looked at the Susanoo that was trying to right itself. I'm going to end it this instant. It took a moment for Levia to understand what Yoru was saying. Her eyes widened as she hissed in anger and worry. Yoru looked down at her and smiled before bending down and kissing the top of her head. Don't you worry about me, I still have one life to spare today, remember? Though unwilling, Livia knew that time was of the essence, so she hissed once more and flew away as far as she reasonably could. She knew that what Yoro was going to do next would annihilate everything. Yoro looked at Livia as she vanished off to the distance before he turned towards Obito, whose Susanoo finally burst free from the pit of metallic sand. He walked towards him. Obito faced the approaching Yoro, his gaze severe, before he formed 6 black shuriken, 3 in each hand, in the likeness of his Mangekyo. Yoro's gaze became somewhat dignified as he saw them and, with his energy resonance, he realized what about them had been so dangerous. They could cut space. Spacelock was a barrier that prevented individuals from utilizing spacetime techniques that allowed them to teleport or connect to independent spaces. This was because Yoro had never considered someone flat-out cutting through space. It seemed like he would have to make adjustments later on. All these thoughts merely flashed through his mind in an instant. Obito hurled the 6 shuriken, his intent on dicing Yoro into 7 parts made blatant. Kamui Shuriken. Yoro faced the approaching destructive shuriken with a tranquil expression. Time appeared to slow down in his sight. Accelerated analysis. Yoru took a breath and opened his palm. 50 meters. A minuscule, nearly unnoticeable, ball of darkness formed on the palm of his right hand. 35 meters. It fed on Yoru's chakra as if it was alive, its voracious appetite allowing it to siphon Yoru until he became nearly empty. The ball only expanded to be about 25 centimeters before Yoru's vision began to swim as even his life force was drained. 20 meters. Circling around the pitch-black orb of energy was an ash-gray ring, reminiscent of a planet's own. Sage Yoru began to revert from the loss of chakra, but he remained staring at the projectiles making their way towards him. Sage Art, Dark Style Dash. 5 meters. Yoru's body became weak as the last of his life force drained from his body, his breath shortening and his heartbeat near stopping. Before he let it go. Spiraling black hole. His body collapsed. The dark orb then floated in the air. Until the shuriken made contact. As soon as both attacks touched, the collision that Obito was expecting did not occur. The dark orb with the ash-gray ring simply sucked in and swallowed the attacks, the energy from which catalyzed its expansion. The dark orb grew and grew, absorbing any and every form of energy that was in the vicinity. Thermal energy, light energy, kinetic energy, natural energy. Chakra. They were all absorbed. Obito's expression changed massively as the ball of darkness consumed everything in its path, the speed and ferocity of its expansion so great that he couldn't even move to react. The Susanoo he was so reliant on was instantly broken apart into particles of energy as soon as the spiraling black hole touched it. Before it swallowed him. And everything went dark. From hundreds of kilometers in the distance, Livia watched quietly as the now dome of dark energy spread and consumed not only the Valley of the End but also the nearby mountain ranges and natural structures surrounding it. Nothing was safe. The diameter of the dome slowly grew and grew after its initial burst of expansion, its reach measuring over tens of kilometers after nearly 10 minutes. Then it stopped. As if reaching its maximum size, the dome of darkness merely stayed the way it was for a moment, quietly existing. Then, a crack appeared on it, a line of white light/energy leaking from it. Then, another crack appeared, one larger than before. Then more cracks. Until it burst. All the energy culminated in the ball of darkness was released at once in a cataclysmic burst of raw energy so intense that it instantly vaporized the numerous mountain ranges in an over a 100-kilometer radius as it spread. The dome of bright energy could easily be seen from incredulous distances away. Nothing could stop the tyrannical might of the all-consuming energy wave. The aftershock of the blast fractured the landscape for a dozen kilometers more. And then, it was silent. Livia was far enough away that all she felt was a gust of wind from the attack. When it all ended, she could see the 3 levels of damage that had occurred. The third level was caused by the aftershock and it was only a few kilometers from the edge of the damage radius. Only fractured rock formations and some levels trees were the evidence of its existence. The second level was from the wave of energy that had propagated after the black dome had cracked, and there was nothing. The entire land, over 100 kilometers in diameter, was bare. Then the first level, it was where the Valley of the End once stood. Now, there was merely a crater, over 20 kilometers deep and wide, devoid of everything but two small human forms. All of this, Livia saw as she speedily flew towards Yoru. Yoru shakily stood up, his body weak from his revival, before he immediately dropped to a knee and gasped for breath. Sage Art, Dark Style, Spiraling Black Hole. It was the name for the technique he had inadvertently created when trying to mix Senjutsu Chakra with a dark release, Raisin Shuriken. That had been a mistake. The only saving grace was that he had tested it in his ID, so there had been no damage done to the real world. Dark Release normally allowed him to absorb the energy from attacks into the diamond mark on his right palm. However, once natural energy was added to the mix, Dark Release would absorb all forms of energy, even his own. It was a suicide attack that took all the energy inside his body to form a ball of darkness that would consume as much energy in the surroundings as it could until it reached its maximum capacity. After which, it would just burst and release all the accumulated energy it had gathered. The amount it could hold before bursting was wholly dependent on the amount of energy it had taken for it to form. Therefore, if Yoru had more chakra, the ball of death would be able to absorb much more energy before bursting, and its destructive capacity would be that much more devastating. It wasn't a technique he planned on using often. "Yo Livia, mind helping me out?" Yoru asked as the snake floated down in front of him. She hissed angrily and bit his arm. There was no energy transference from that bite. Yoru sighed. "I'm sorry." He looked down and gently stroked her head. "I've made you worry." Livia stopped and looked up at him before biting his arm once more. This time, energy flooded Yoru's veins, his chakra levels increasing and his wounds healing. With this vital boost, Yoru stood back up and walked towards Obito before looking down at his sprawled-out form. Both his eyes were open, however, one of his eyes was now a milky white. He had lost his sight from Izanagi. But he was still very much alive. He slowly turned his gaze up towards Yoru and asked, "Why? Why couldn't you save her?" The unspoken words were understood. Yoru's expression was invariable. Everything up until now seemed like a joke. This entire conflict seemed to have stemmed from Obito's misconception that Rin had died that day. The Four Tails attack. The Council massacre. Their fight today. All of this could have been avoided. And that's what pissed Yoru off even more. So, that's why he told him. "Obito." Yoru began, his vision somber. "Rin, she's been alive for years now. I never failed to save her. She visits your grave every day, you know." A silent wind blew between them. Obito's face seemed to have blanked for a moment, his brain processing the words he had just heard before his eyes widened. Then, Yoru felt it. His heart thumped with a bang and his body shook from the violent influx of emotions he could detect from Obito. Yoru felt he couldn't even breathe from how potent they were. Loss. Confusion. Then. Understanding. Realization. Shock. Disbelief. Despair. Yoru took a step back, his eyes trembling as empathy allowed him to experience those emotions as if they were his own. But more than anything, two emotions stood out, their existence so evident they seemed corporeal. Betrayal. Rage. Zet, Su. Obito yelled out with hatred that nearly consumed his being, tears leaking out his eyes. Yoru empathetically understood. Whoever Zetsu was, they had driven Obito to this state. They had betrayed him. That being said, "I understand," Yoru said. "However, I still need to deal with another one. Is he yours?" he asked as he looked up to see a man floating a couple of kilometers above. Yoru had sensed that individual up into the second layer of the atmosphere during his time as Sage Yoru, but obviously, he hadn't been able to divert the attention necessary to deal with him. Suddenly, Obito's eyes widened forebodingly. His body disappeared like an illusion. And he appeared behind Yoru. ! Yoru felt a threat to his life like he'd never felt before. And it wasn't coming from Obito. From up near the clouds, a man with ripple-patterned purple eyes floated in the air and looked down below as if he were a god looking at mere mortals. He uttered a word. A word that Yoru's excellent hearing picked up and caused every cell in his body to vibrate. Shinrai Tensei. Then, another word sounded out behind him, one that he hadn't expected to hear coming from his opponent. Susanoo. Everything happened too quickly. All Yoru felt was his body shake to its core as a repulsive force, unlike anything he had ever experienced, slammed into the Susanoo surrounding him and Obito with near unprecedented force. Then, as the earth shattered and the ground caved beneath, everything went dark. Yoru took a few deep breaths and flinched a bit as his body ached from the impact. Feeling his surroundings enclosed, Yoru exerted a bit of force and pushed away some of the heaping chunks of rock covering his body. Yoru then blinked and looked inside his nearly completely torn-up shirt to see Livia poking her head from within, her injuries relatively light. With a gentle sigh, Yoru then looked down below at Obito's body. His eyes were wide open and this time, they were both blank white. He had now lost both his eyes. Then, 6 forms dropped down from above, surrounding Yoru and Obito. Each of them wore a black cloak with red clouds. Each of them wore the headbands of the Hidden Rain Village, their symbol crossed out horizontally on the metal plate. Each of them had black piercings on their face and body. Each of them had nearly identical chakra signatures. But, more important than all of that, each of them had the same purple ripple-patterned eyeballs. Yoru's hairs stood on end. Akatsuki, those eyes, have I seen or heard about them somewhere? What are they? Yoru took a step back towards Obito's down form and made sure there was contact between his shoe and Obito's body. Then, what appeared to be the leader of the group, a man with short spiky orange hair, looked down at Obito. What is the meaning of this? He didn't reply. The man remained silent for a moment before he outstretched his hand. Very well. Yoru spoke up, his brows furrowed. Who are you? The man regarded Yoru for a moment and explained simply. Pain. Besides the apparent leader, the other 5 bodies immediately rushed in towards Yoru and Obito. Unfortunately, they were too late. ID create, empty. Yoru, Livia, and Obito's body vanished. Yoru, gamer. I took several breaths to calm my surging emotions and sat down, the quiet expanse of my ID relaxing my nerves. I stayed like this for a while. Then, I lifted my head up and looked at Obito. The man's gaze was vacant. His motionless body was sprawled out on the floor. He was dead. He had passed soon after I had transferred us to my ID. It was as if he had simply lost the will to live after realizing that we were safe. The only reason I had been able to use the ID was due to the fact that my earlier dark release attack had completely uprooted, and more than likely destroyed, the ice rods that I had used to create my spacelock barrier. Numerous thoughts went through my mind. I looked up at the sky. It's almost time, Livia, we'll leave soon. She hissed somewhat sadly. Don't worry, I said in comfort. We'll be back in time, we just need some time off. I took out an empty scroll from my inventory and wrote down just about every piece of information I had gleaned from today. From Obito to those individuals from Amagekure and Akatsuki, and the name Zetsu. I jotted them all down. I then closed the scroll before encrypting and sealing it with Fuinjutsu. I made sure it was complex enough so that only someone with Minato and Kushina's level of expertise on the subject would be able to decipher it and unlock the scroll. After that, I walked up to Obito's corpse and closed his eyelids. With the scroll in hand, I placed it on Obito's chest and placed his arms on top of it. I waved my hand, conjuring a stream of flame that completely burnt off his clothing and removed any trace of battle from his form. With that, I kneeled down and placed a hand on his body. Mystical healing. All the scars of battle that had been on his form disappeared. Mystical healing could even heal up a rotting corpse to its previously healthy skin position. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, the body remained dead despite looking perfectly fine. Having healed up his scars, I then channeled ice release through my palms. Ice release, ice coffin. The ice slowly encased his body while I used my mental faculties to shape it in the form of a respectable coffin. Next, I fogged up the more sensitive areas of his body that were exposed through the see-through crystal coffin. I then implanted my Amanoto Kotachi mark on it. Then, Amanoto Kotachi. In a flash, a kunai appeared in my ID where the ice coffin had once been. The same kunai I had stuck in Obito's grave days prior. I think I was lost for a moment as I just stared blankly at the kunai. I didn't know what I felt. I felt a soft wet sensation on my cheek. I snapped myself out of it and rubbed Livia's head. "Thank you," I said before standing up. Livia coiled herself around my body and rested on my shoulders. I stood still for a moment. After, I straightened up. It's time. Ping. System update, 100%. Ping. Grand Quest. Mission, visit the myriad worlds. Reward, excitement, adventure, and possibly love. Failure, you'll live a pretty sad and meaningless existence if you don't at least visit a few of them. Ping. Congratulations! You have unlocked the innate trait, Devour, by reaching Gamer's Body, LVL Max, and Level 100. Devour, active. Absorb the essence of your defeated enemies and acquire a portion of their abilities and stats. Different entities and different forms of life utilize different forms of energy for their survival. You can take that energy. Absorb 1% to 10% of enemy stats. The skill, ID, Create, has been updated. Monster Instant Dungeons are no longer available nor required. ID, Create, active. ID, Create is a skill that connects you to your very own pocket dimension that you can actualize in the world and drag those in contact with you inside through ID, Yoru. Your ID, Yoru, is separate from the real world but also connected to it through you. You can also form an illusion barrier that acts as a mirror of the real world that you can drag people in, travel in, or hide in using ID, Empty. Since the illusion barrier is a mirror of the actual world when you exit it, you'll find yourself in the same area you were at in the illusion barrier in the outside world. Finally, you can now travel to other worlds using the skill, ID, Travel. Available dimensions. ID, Empty. ID, Yoru. ID, Travel. Ping. Congratulations! After reaching level 100, you have unlocked the skill, ID, Travel. ID, Travel, active. You are connected to the numerous worlds of the tree. ID, Travel, also known as interdimensional travel, allows you to travel to new worlds and explore new places. Access the list of worlds and choose the world you want to visit. Worlds visited. Naruto, alternate. List of worlds. Cooldown, 3 months. Ping. You are going through some changes in your gamer's body. Due to this, your body and mind have been affected. Ping. Gamer's body, passive, LVL max, puberty. 200% increase to HP and CP regeneration rate. 200% increase to HP and CP. Resistances. Puberty, increase growth rate by 400% for a period of time. Lowers the intensity of gamer's mind. Ping. Gamer's mind, intensity has been affected by the effects of puberty. Ping. Gamer's mind, intensity is now 50%. Gamer's mind, passive, intensity, 50%. Allows the user to calmly and logically think things through. Allows a peaceful state of mind. Grants immunity to psychological status effects. The intensity level dictates how much gamer's mind influences your emotions. An intensity of 100% completely shuts off your capacity to feel emotion, while an intensity of 0% returns your emotional capability to its maximum possible state. Ping. Your stat sheet has been updated due to the system update. Ping. Name, Yorodon. Race, human. Age, 14 years old. Tier, 6C. Tier bonus, 270% status effectiveness. HP, 2784699/2784699 Regan, 83,540 per min. CP, 5589000/5589000 Regan, 223,560 per min. CC, 100%. STR, 3069. VIT, 3327. DEX, 3258. INT, 3159. WIS, 3054. NG, 5750. Stat total, 21617. Points, 0. Rio, 67,355,348. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. There were a few more notifications that had to do with improvements to perks and whatnot, but one thing immediately caught my attention, aside from the fact that I was now 14. No levels. I furrowed my brow and thought. It seemed like I was now measured in tiers, and that my strength was measured not only by my stats but also by the status effectiveness bonus given to me by my tier. It seems like I needed to pay someone a visit. Livia, be patient for me for a little bit. I began as I looked at her. I need to go see a snake. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.